I'm going to be an emotional night for us.
You know how it is.
How these meetings can get, huh? You just never know. Okay. Let's just...
There we go.
Get our cockpit situated here. Monitors and everything. All we lack is a joystick.
The study report you guys did was quite lengthy. It's quite lengthy.
All these requirements, they
Nice.
jump through the hoops.
Hey.
Did you read the whole thing? Okay, good.
I start reading stuff like that. I'm not the expert, right? Right? And then we go on recommendations and stuff like that. I start reading that and I start thinking of things that I haven't thought of in years,
Right.
like fishing lures or stuff like that.
There's about 2 pages in there that you can read.
You know, staff reads it. Think we're ready to roll?
Why?
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the monthly, more or less, meeting of the City of Sandy Planning Commission. And this is tonight's meeting for Monday, February 25, 2019. We will begin with a roll call. See who's here.
Commissioner Carlton.
Present.
Commissioner Lisowski is excused. Commissioner McLean-Wenzel.
Here.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner Mobley.
Here.
And Chairman Crosby.
Present. This is I see a number of new faces out there. Every time that we do meet, we give opportunity at the beginning of the meeting for just general comments from anybody in the audience. If you have something that you would like to speak to the Planning Commission tonight on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda, this is your time to do it. And as we will ask for any testimony tonight, we ask you to step up to the podium and state your name and your address so we have it in the record. Is there anybody who has any comments to the commission tonight? Okay. We will move right ahead. We have just one item of new business tonight. It's a public hearing, which we will open officially at 7:01. This is public hearing, or file number 18-025, Jacoby Heights Subdivision. And I'll call first if there's any abstentions from the Planning Commission.
I have to abstain on this one. I'm the owner of Lancaster Engineering. My company conducted the transportation impact study for the applicant, so.
Okay, that would probably also fall under a possible conflict of interest.
It would, certainly.
Just maybe a question maybe for David. That, one of the main topics on the agenda is interpretation of code, which I guess I would wonder if that is really a conflict. I mean, as far as the decision of a motion, whatever, but it would seem that he could sit for, interpretation of code, because I don't think it has anything to do with it. But I would just throw that out as possible for David to comment on.
So was that I think that was a question for me, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so if, and was that Commissioner Carlton?
Yes.
Yeah, me again.
Okay. Thanks. So Commissioner Carlton, it's a good observation. I think if all that was before the commission tonight was just the interpretation question, then, obviously that wouldn't present any issue. But because it's coming up in the context of the application itself, as has been the case with other applications where Commissioner Mobley has had involvement, even though it's sort of its own issue, it does affect the application necessarily. So I think he would still need to recuse himself even for the interpretation piece. But for the whole thing, it's kind of an all or nothing thing.
I'm
enough.
just trying to help him, make him earn his keep here, I guess.
Thanks, Tom.
He keeps getting out of this thing.
For any of you in the audience that don't know, I refer to it as our attorney in the box. That is the city attorney who is here telephonically. Okay, moving on, any ex parte contact to declare?
I was at a meeting for the tree committee last week, and luckily we were stopped before the conversation went too far or got too specific. So Kelly stopped the conversation from going too far, but I was there.
Any issues with that, Don or John? Okay. You're all familiar with the site location that we're looking at. Call for any challenges to the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission? Or any challenge to any individual member of the Planning Commission? What's left up here. Okay, if you testify, you must raise all issues at this hearing. Your comments should state why the application should or should not be approved, or include proposed modifications you believe are necessary for approval according to the standards. If you do not raise specific issues at the final evidentiary hearing, or by close of the record, or fail to provide statements or evidence to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue, you will not be able to appeal the decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that particular issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party has the right to request a continuance of the public hearing, or in the alternative, to have the record remain open. Staff report.
All right, so we're here tonight to review the Jacoby Heights subdivision proposal. Just to give you an idea of where it is, down in the south of town, adjacent to Cascadia Village. Zoomed in a little bit further there, you can see Cascadia Village to the west, and that's Tickle Creek up there in the northeast corner. So this is a 32 dwelling unit subdivision proposal. They're requesting 3 variances. These are 3 variances that we see with a lot of the subdivision applications. So they're asking to have the front doors face, for the houses along Jacoby, face the interior street network rather than Jacoby Road, which is a designated transit street. They're asking for a 1-tiered lot configuration rather than a 2-tiered lot configuration along Jacoby, and this actually only applies to 1 lot. And then they're asking for a variance to increase the maximum block length beyond 400 feet for the north side of the proposed Woodstock Street between Camden Court and the east property boundary. And then finally, they're asking for a code interpretation request of whether Chapter 1792 applies to subdivisions. So I'll start with the code interpretation. I think that's probably the hot ticket item tonight. We've reviewed the development code, the ordinances that were passed with 17102, and we've talked to David, our city attorney, and we haven't found anything to indicate that 1792 doesn't apply to subdivisions. There's no language saying that it doesn't. There was nothing in the ordinance either that spoke to that, saying that that 17102 is the only thing that can apply to subdivisions. If you look at the full title of Chapter 1792, it's Landscaping and Screening General Standards, All Zones. So we're interpreting that to mean that it applies to all zones, which includes single-family residential, which is typically where this subdivision is, but it also include R1, R2, everything. The specific provision that we think they're questioning is 1792-10C, which talks about significant trees being integrated into the design of a development, and that trees to be retained shall be protected from damage during construction. We also find that development and construction are both, that a subdivision qualifies as both development and construction. And then we have a bunch of comp plan Goal 5 policies that support retaining significant trees as well. So I listed them here. I don't need to read through every single one, but basically sensitive site design and innovative site and building designs to reduce impact on tree stands, and then considering incentives to encourage preservation of significant trees. So we are recommending that 1792 continue to apply to all zones, including single-family residential subdivisions. So looking further at this proposal, so this is just a general layout of the proposed subdivision here with the 32 lots. Tract A up in the northwest corner is a stormwater detention, and then that dotted area is the fish overlay. And they're proposing to extend Newton Street, which is an existing street to the west in Cascadia Village. They're proposing to extend that east through the property and then create 3 new local streets. So Woodstock Street is the east-west one there, Middlebury Ave is north-south, and then Camden Court, the little cul-de-sac there at the top. So I'm just going to walk through the biggest issues or recommendations that we have that we thought might come up. So there's 6 of them. And that is currently the FSH area is part of the lots that are well over the required size, or at least some of them are. And so our recommendation is to create a separate FSH tract and have that dedicated to the city. We'd also like to see a geological assessment for each lot proposed to be developed with a single-family home that has 25% or greater slopes that's outside that FSH area. We'd like to see a minimum of 10 additional retention trees. We'd like to see the location of the pedestrian connector trail on the, along with this proposal, or have the applicant provide justification as to why they think tax lot 800, which is the one to the east, makes more sense. If the variance is granted to allow the houses on Jacoby to face interior, we'd like the typical thing we have been requiring of other subdivisions of adding decorative fencing and decorative building features on the rear sides of the buildings that face Jacoby. And then this last point, designing Newton Street with 3/4 street section to the eastern property boundary. We talked to the applicant a little bit about this, and whether that 3/4 street section is on their property or if they kind of buy or whatever the property to the south and are able to get in on that and pave that. I think we're open to both ideas. So just show quickly. So here in blue is outlined the FSH tract area that we're requesting be dedicated to the city. Circled here are the 6 lots that have a fair amount of, the red there is 25% or greater slopes, and so we were wanting geological assessment. That's just in 1756, our hillside development chapter requests that. Some ideas from where more tree retention could occur are lot 19, which would actually also be a potential spot for a trail connection, so that might be a good one to get 2 things in one. Potentially in the rear yards of some of the houses down on the south, or maybe a 20-foot buffer along Jacoby there. So the pedestrian connection, at the original pre-application meeting, we'd requested that it would be in line with Middlebury Avenue there. But like I said, lot 19 to the right has quite a number of trees, and so potentially, and it has a lot of 25% and greater slopes, so it makes it more challenging to build on anyway. So potentially locating the trail connector on lot 19 might help preserve more trees and provides that trail connection down to the future Tickle Creek Trail eventually. So again, just adding the decorative fencing details along lot 30, 32, 9, and 10, which face Jacoby, if you were to grant that variance. And then the 3/4 Newton Street extension. So again, whether that happens on this property or if they acquire the property to the south to pave that and create the 3/4 street there, that would be fine too. But we just can't have a half street serve more than 2 lots, and since there's houses to the east that would probably be using this road, it needs to be at least 3/4 street from our Public Works Director. So the staff recommendation is to approve the subdivision with the conditions outlined in the report, to approve the 3 variances, and to interpret the code such that Chapter 1792 continues to apply to all zones. the hearing.
And if you would like to, I think now might be an appropriate time to hear from our attorney on the code interpretation and how he's looked at it as well, or would you like to wait until after everybody's spoken?
Fine now, we'll get the staff part done.
So David, could you add to that code interpretation kind of what we talked about and give any other advice you'd like to give on that?
Yeah, sure. So Kelly reached out to me, I don't know what it was, a couple months ago probably, with this issue, and we talked it through, and there's really nothing in 1792 or 17102 that indicates 1792 would not be applicable during subdivision review. What I said, and and this remains true tonight, I mean, it's possible that that was the intent. I certainly don't, express a view to say, no, there's no way that that's what the city intended. It's just that, Kelly's job and then by extension my job, is to kind of look at what's been written and what does it say. And based on that, there's, the language in here, even when you look at, in 1792, this 9210C, the issue of development, and whether that means that the subdivision is not included. The city's code has a definition of development, and it's very broad, and it just talks about any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, and then it goes on to say including but not limited to construction of buildings, other structures, grading, compaction, paving, excavation, all the things that you would see in a ultimately in a subdivision in terms of building it out. So it really is, ultimately an interpretation question, and that's one that, obviously the Planning Commission and then, the City Council as well, to the extent they're called on to interpret the code. That's one of your main functions. And so, from our point of view, what it really came down to was just not seeing anything that said 1792 is inapplicable when it comes to tree retention. But, also recognizing, at least from my point of view, that there is a tension there in terms of you having a separate code provision in Chapter 102 that really addresses, forestry and tree preservation specifically. So, that's what I tend to call tension exists. That's true, but when looking at it and also looking at, as Emily said, the actual ordinance that adopted 17102, there didn't appear to be anything in there that said, well, we're looking for 17102 to be the exclusive method. And so when you have that, normally what you would do, unless there's an interpretation to the contrary, would be to try to, harmonize both 102 and 1792 when it comes to tree preservation.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions for staff?
Well, just maybe one question for David, since we got him on the horn. The main bottom line is, at the top of the page it says all zones. The intent, a zone refers to R1, R2, C1, C2. Is that correct?
Yeah, any zone in the city, correct.
Yeah, and the reason all zones is there is because we do have some code that applies to C1, for example, or C2, right?
Yeah, well, yes, you have, one example that comes to mind is, you have design standards in 1790 that apply, in certain zones, but not others, so that's true. Okay,
so I just wanted to, because it really boils down to the definition of the word zone, it sounds like to me. So that got what I wanted to hear from you. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Call for the applicant's presentation.
Good evening.
Hi.
Who are you?
I'm Tracy Brown, and I live at 17075 Fur Drive, Sandy. And if you had asked me about 3 years ago, would I be standing in front of you tonight talking on behalf of Corey Knight, I would have said you're crazy. Because Corey first approached me about 15 years ago on this property, and I was planning director, and said, this is before it was in the urban growth boundary, and said, hey, what are my options for, annexing this or bringing it in? I said, well, sorry, it's not in the UGB, come back. So Corey would come back about every 6 months to maybe a year, and I could almost gauge when he came in based on when his kids were born, he would take a break there for a while. And then eventually it came to the point of we went through the study and annexed, or the growth boundary expanded, then he annexed it, and so now we're here today. So I guess in my presentation, we've gone through, I've spent a lot of time with Ray Moore, Volcanic, we've gone through all of the conditions and have quite a few comments on those. And I'll hand out our sheet that we went through on that. And I guess in terms of the interpretation, it would be our request, and I think it makes sense to review that first if the city attorney and everybody is in agreement, because there's a lot of conditions that if you interpret the code to that 1792 is not applicable, they would go away. So that would be our request. So I'll hand out these items. So as an introduction, what we've done is gone through and reviewed each of the conditions, and the first condition, I guess, has to do with the interpretation of that code section. And so I guess I would just pause and ask if you would like me to just address that, or you'd like me to go ahead and go through all of our discussion about the request for interpretation as well as our comments on the conditions.
Yeah, it's like number one in the front of the page, right? So,
Pardon, what'd you say?
that's number one here in the
Yeah.
middle of their page. It's,
Yeah.
we have up on front on ours, so I think that's, but
Go through
I'm
the
okay with
request
that.
for
And,
interpretation.
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, first off, we did a pretty extensive look of the city record regarding the adoption of 1792 and 17102, which is the urban forestry section. And I include, and it starts on, I think, page 133 of 132 of your online packet. I don't know if you're looking online or it's printed out, but on page 132 is Exhibit D, which is the analysis that we did regarding the code interpretation. So our main contention is that 1792 does not apply to subdivision developments. It does say all zones, and there could be cases, and there are conditional uses that are items that, or development that aren't subdivisions, that this chapter could be applicable to. But really, if you read that chapter, it talks about landscaping, and that's the title of the chapter. So that's our kind of main premise. This code, this section, or this chapter does not apply, and more specifically 1792 10C, which staff is using to try to increase the number of trees to be required to be retained, should not be used, and they're interpreting in an incorrect way. So I'll go into more detail about what I mean by that. So I'd like to just refer to all of the exhibits that I included, including council goals dating back from 1997, when the idea of developing a urban forestry ordinance was presented to the council. Now, I wasn't around at the time, but since 1792 was adopted in 97, all of this work going forward occurred after that landscaping section was adopted. So everybody involved, I mean, I think the record is very clear that everybody involved in the process, including the Urban Forestry Committee, staff, myself, the city manager, the city council, planning commission. I think Jerry is probably the only person here that was around at the time on the planning commission. I believe everyone felt that the only ordinance that was there to regulate trees and subdivisions and land clearing and harvest was 17102. Can I grab my, Okay, so, you know, so we looked at the legislative history, and I think that is relevant in kind of evaluating the intent of a code, because that will give you what was the thinking that went into the development of this code when the city council said in their goal-setting meetings, we need to develop an urban forestry ordinance. If they had thought there was this chapter 1792 was going to be applicable, there would have been no reason to do that. What would have been the purpose, really? So the conclusion of looking at the the findings, if you look at the findings of that ordinance 17102, they also speak to, there's a need to develop an urban forestry ordinance. The committee was instructed to develop an ordinance regulating tree preservation and harvest. This was adopted not under Goal 5, which was cited previously, but under Goal 6 for water quality. So really the findings, I don't know if staff's looked at the findings, but the findings really point to that the urban forestry ordinance was intended to be the primary ordinance to regulate tree harvesting in the city. So then on the second page of my memo, I compared the language in 1792 with the language in 17102, which is urban forestry. And if you look at the intent of 1792, it talks about the aesthetic and economic value of landscaping and encourages its use, buffering and screening unsightly features, and to soften and buffer large-scale structures and parking lots. That doesn't sound like urban forestry in a subdivision context to me, unless we're talking about buffering, somebody's house or their driveway, which I don't think that would be considered a parking lot. It also goes on that it prescribes standards for landscaping, buffering and screening. And we can look at the definitions of what landscaping is and buffering and screening. And really those are not things that are found in your typical subdivision. And so even though the chapter uses the words all zones, I think really looking at the intent of that intent statement speaks to landscaping in the broad sense of the use of the term, and it talks about trees, bushes, grass, arranged in a development or yard. And really, the section and buffering and screening and parking lots and things like that. In contrast, if you look at chapter 17102, it speaks to the, regulating tree retention and the benefits that trees provide. And really those are in conserving, replenishing ecological and aesthetic features. So it's really a different intent. I think if you were to look at really that, and those intent statements may be enough to make a decision that, yeah, this one is really talking about developments in the context of parking lots, commercial, industrial, or could be residential homes and things like that, but not individual lots or subdivisions. If we dive down a little bit further and look at the language in 1792-10C, this says significant plant and tree species should be preserved and to the greatest extent practicable, integrate into the design of a development. And then it goes on to talk about trees of 25 inches or greater circumference, so on. So the language in this sentence, which staff is basically hanging their hat on, uses the word should, and it doesn't use the word shall. And those words have a much different meaning. Should is a word that is aspirational. It's kind of a, denotes a guideline or a recommendation, where the word shall is a mandatory requirement. And so if you read the staff report in the section where they talk about in 1792-10C, they cite the code, and then the next sentence they say, and applicant shall. They're just changing the words on the fly. There's no basis for using the word shall, because it doesn't say shall, it says should in the code, which is an aspirational. So even if you thought that 1792 applied to subdivisions, the way it's being applied to subdivisions is incorrect, because they're changing the language. And it goes on to say that in that same phrase, trees should be preserved to the greatest extent practicable. So what does that mean? I don't think anybody knows, or we all know, but it's a different definition. And so I don't think the reason for, part of the reason for developing 17102 was to be very clear and objective, and so it can be measured. And so that's why the language in 17102 says this chapter only applies to properties greater than an acre, only trees 11 inches and greater, and so it's quite a bit different, and 3 trees per acre. That's very clear and objective standard, and that was really the reason, I guess part of the council's desire as that code was being developed, have something that everybody could understand and that could be applied universally. So not to the greatest extent practical. That had been put into a goal, sure, because that's what it is, but the specific language is very clear and objective. So I did a comparison of those 2 sections kind of side by side, and I talked about where the urban forestry section, as I mentioned, does apply to properties greater than an acre. The chapter 1792, there's no property size specified. 17102 talks about trees shall be retained, where 1792, trees should be preserved to the greatest extent practicable. And I think some of the other items, looking at the comparison, really one of the big parts of 17102, it talks about trees can be located anywhere on the site at the owner's discretion. So the way staff is looking at 1792, they're saying, we want you to put it there. And that really wasn't the intent that the Urban Forestry Committee looked at. It wanted to be flexible. It wanted to provide certainty in terms of what the developer was up against. And as long as they met these things, they could be approved. There wasn't any reason to deny it. 1792 also does not have anything related to the condition of trees. So even though it talks about these trees 8 inches or 25 inches or greater circumference integrated into the design. They should be preserved. Doesn't say what kind of trees. They could be, failing trees for that matter. So as staff has been looking at this, they're trying to combine these two sections, and really we think that's incorrect. So the conclusion of my review of the code language, so the legislative history, I guess conclusion was, looking at the record that was put into this, over a period of 4 years. So I came on board in August of 2002 with the city, and the code was adopted in November of 2002. So I wasn't really involved in developing it, although I did have a hand in kind of tweaking it to make sure it was more clear, I felt. So I think that the review of that is that it was clearly not, that was supposed to be the chapter to regulate trees. It wasn't 1792. My conclusion of the code language is that the word should, even if this chapter was applicable, is really not being interpreted correctly because of some of the language in that section. So in summary, Chapter 17102 was adopted under the guidance of a Urban Forestry Committee over a period of 4 years, and that was 4 years after 1792 was developed, already had been adopted. The record shows that everyone involved in the development and adoption of the tree regulations believed these regulations did not already exist in the code to protect trees in residential subdivisions. The intent of Chapter 1792 speaks to landscaping, buffering, and screening, which are generally not relevant at the subdivision level, and they are applicable to commercial, industrial, and multifamily projects. The intent of Chapter 17102 speaks to regulating tree retention and the benefits of trees. And as I went through, there's some conflicts between the two in terms of the language. The bottom line is that 1792-10C is subjective. It does not specify a mandatory requirement. The use of the word should denotes a recommendation or a guideline, and the phrase to the greatest extent practicable is subject to interpretation. So why is this important? It's important because staff could run amok, we'll say, in preserving trees trying to switch this language from should be preserved to shall be preserved. They're also trying to apply a smaller tree diameter than what is currently being required in Chapter 17102. 17102 is clear and objective, contains mandatory tree retention standards, where 17102 or 1792 is subjective and leaves significant room for interpretation. And that's what you all get paid the big bucks to decide, looking at this interpretation. The difference between the tree retention requirements in 102 and those in 1792 could be significant depending on how they're applied, because this phrase, to the greatest extent practicable, is really subject to interpretation. So using the two different chapters, it's currently what's happening is both chapters are kind of being used interchangeably at the desire to protect more trees. I guess I'd step back for a second and say I would wager that there's nobody in this city that's planted more trees than I have, or instituted more tree planting programs in this city. So I'm a fond believer in tree protection. I just think it needs to be done right. And my main concern is that it's being interpreted incorrectly. Based on, it's kind of using an end run, we'll say, from what that committee established. So based on the pre-application notes, the applicant was kind of put through a little bit of rigor. So in attachment 10 of the pre-application notes, it clearly says that the applicant, they needs to specify and inventory trees 11 inches and greater and 6 inches within the fish overlay. So that was language in the pre-application notes. Later, we got another email from one of the city employees saying, hey, by the way, remember, you got inventory trees 11 inches and greater. And then, so we submitted the application with that understanding, and we got an incompleteness saying, well, no, you need inventory trees 8 inches and greater now. So this cost the applicant about $3,100 extra that he didn't anticipate. Plus there was about $2,000 in surveying. There's a lot of little trees on this property, as you can see. So it's, you know, I guess my point in bringing this up is not to throw them under the bus. It's just to show that there's a lot of confusion, and really that was the intent of Chapter 17-102, to have it very clear, one place, those are the tree regulations. So I guess I'm just about done with this part of it. And if you just look at the chapter itself, there's other sections, even the section A, 1792, 10A, it starts off by saying, where landscaping is required by this code, detailed landscaping plans shall be submitted for review. You know, you don't, in a subdivision, you don't need to do a landscaping plan. There's a street tree plan, but that's typically the extent of landscaping. Each lot is landscaped as it's constructed. There's no landscaping plan for that required. So I guess I would pause there and see if you have any questions.
You referenced attachment 10, which is an email that you've highlighted the request to have an arborist report for the 11 trees.
Right.
Can you clarify me a little bit more that you got some feedback that said you needed now to do 8 instead of 11? Where did the 8 come from?
Well, so as I said, the 8 is coming from 1792. So they're reading 1792 as being applicable. And in 1792, it talks about trees 25 inches and greater circumference, which we never measure in circumference. So we translate that to diameter, it's about 8 inches. Shall be preserved to the greatest extent practicable. So after going through the pre-app and getting additional information, then the incompleteness letter came back saying, well, you didn't address 1792, and now you got to look at 8-inch trees. A little frustrating in that regard. You know, felt like the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, unfortunately. But I'm not trying to I just want to make sure this is clarified.
Okay.
Okay. So our request would be that, I mean, after Ray talks, that you consider I have more on each and every one of the conditions. So, you know, if you want to make a decision on 1792, before I do that, I mean, I'll sit down for now and let me know if you want me to continue on.
Okay, thanks.
Good evening. For the record, Ray Moore, All County Surveyors and Planners, P.O. Box 955, Sandy, Oregon. And I'd like to I also request that we kind of, you know, if you can make a decision on this, all these developers in the back room here can go home. They're here because they're interested in it. It plays an important part on, you know, when they're negotiating with existing homeowners with a bunch of 8-inch trees on their property, for instance. And if they're going to have to start protecting those and saving those to the greatest extent practical or not. And it is subjective. I mean, we were before you with Marshall Ridge Subdivision, which, you know, it was a similar situation. You know, we read the code and try to do our best to put together a plan that meets the code. And then when we get the staff, sometimes they have a different opinion on greatest extent feasible as opposed to us. So anyway, let me back up. Tracy didn't touch on one thing. You know, I've been working in Sandy since 1996, so prior to Tracy, the previous planner was Sue Barker. I don't know if anybody knows Sue or remembers Sue, but back then, prior to Section 102, we never addressed 1792 with subdivisions. It was submit a subdivision, cut all the trees down if you want. And so, you know, nobody's here when those code sections were written, but Sue was. She never applied that section. My guess is if it was intended to be applied to subdivisions, she would have made us jump through those hoops back then. I also wanted to point out, and hopefully you received a letter from Brad Picking late this afternoon, and you know, he was part of the committee. He was on the committee that helped write the urban forestry section, and so it was his recollection that, yeah, they're kind of in agreement with what I'm saying. 1792 did not apply to subdivisions. That's why they put this committee together to start making some regulations. So he made some really good points in his letter. I won't read it to you, but you know, hopefully you had a chance to take a look at it. The other thing I wanted to point out, I am on the committee. We're going to start revisiting 1792 and urban forestry, and to try to get them in sync. So hopefully that'll happen in the next year and a half, and we'll work out these issues. So until then, I would just request not to muddy the waters with reviewing both these codes that don't agree. It makes my life miserable. It makes your life much more difficult trying to review something. And then same with staff. I mean, if they're looking at this code, they have to decide, well, what's the greatest thing practical, you know? What is that? It's a moving target, and it's anybody's opinion. And to try to design something and have somebody else agree with different opinions, it's almost impossible. So I just urge you to not have that section apply to subdivisions. At least, I mean, let us get through this process of rewriting the codes so that they jive and make sense. Otherwise, we're just going to be muddying the waters for this application and future applications that are coming down the pipe over the next year or so. Any questions or?
No, in fact, I appreciate not just repeating what Tracy said, but just giving us some information.
Yeah, okay. And I don't know if anybody else here would like to speak, but.
Do we can take testimony all the way through on this?
Well, I have a question, a procedural question. It's maybe more for David, and some of you may be thinking the same thing. Since the interpretation question is wrapped into this public hearing, can we have a discussion, make a motion, and decide on that before doing anything else on this application?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think that it may be the best course of action, just because if there are other conditions, as Tracy pointed out, as the applicant pointed out, that may be affected by it, it would seem like the best use of your time is maybe to address that issue first. So that's perfectly acceptable.
Okay.
My main question, Jerry, is, you know, if you don't testify at this hearing, you know, you lose your rights. And so if any of the other people in the room, developers, want to weigh in on the code interpretation,
yeah,
we need to give them a chance to testify. That's my question.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking that to give the opportunity to just speak to that issue now.
Yeah, that would be efficient in time, because then if they want to talk about something else later, then they can always come up again. But if we could restrict the comments to the code, if anybody in the room would like to talk about them, and just encourage they don't repeat necessarily what was said, but they want to get their name on the record so they have standing.
Yeah.
I would like to see that we do that.
Okay.
You're in agreement with that, David?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I would, encourage people, if that's the route the commission goes with respect to taking up and discussing the interpretation first, that we do that to the exclusion of everything else. Anybody that wants to comment on remaining portions of the application certainly would still have an opportunity to do that.
Okay. So what we're kind of going to do here is we do have a order of procedures for a public hearing. We're going to move forward with it, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, move forward with it on the code interpretation issue. So there'll be opportunity for proponent testimony, opponent testimony. We'll have our discussion, And then we will make a motion and act on that. And then we're going to kind of go back through to look at the other aspects of it, and again, have another opportunity for proponent and opponent.
Right, mainly the three variances are the
Right.
other topic of discussion.
So, I hope you all understand that. So we'll open it now for proponent testimony. If you're in favor of, now, what you'd be in favor of speaking to is the staff's recommendation on the interpretation. And then after that, we'll give opportunity for anybody who's not in favor of it, again, so that you're on the record, gives you opportunity to speak later on. So anybody that would like to speak that's in favor of the staff recommendation that.
I'd like to add one more thing. Tom just brought something to, a good point, is densities, minimum and maximum densities. Some people's opinion is, hey, if you hit the minimum densities and you save 8-inch trees to the greatest extent practical, perfect. Other people may not agree with that. There could be a loss of, a substantial number of lots to meet a moving target on the so we have to be careful. If we start applying 1792, we might be reaching our minimum density threshold instead of middle of the road.
So, can I bring something to
Sure.
your attention?
Sure.
So I think I like this approach, and I would like as many people to go home as early as possible. My only hesitancy is actually what Ray just brought to our attention, is if people start using other potential impacts caused by these two code sections, are we really interpreting these code sections, or are we making a code interpretation based on how it affects development? I mean, I think what's before us tonight is the 1792 apply or not to subdivisions. When we start talking about density and how it might affect the maximum amount of buildability for a subdivision, I don't really think that's what you're being tasked with right now. And maybe I'm wrong, but that kind of makes me a little bit nervous because we're talking about things, I think, outside of the code interpretation once we start talking about other items, how it affects it. And I don't know, maybe you guys feel differently than I do.
I think it keeps it clear and concise. I mean, there's always impacts to anything you say.
And I'm not saying that what Ray brought up is not valid. I'm just saying that just think about that with what we're actually really reviewing, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very complex, interrelated, extremely interrelated issue.
Well,
and
I have a question since Ray's up here, because you've done a lot of subdivisions. I don't recall this issue coming up on some of the past subdivisions. I've been on the commission now 13 years or more, and I mean,
You're exactly it. And as far as I know, the only one that has been applied to is and they can correct me if I'm wrong, Marshall Ridge, and they got blindsided with it. We didn't ask for clarification at the time, but anyway. So out of the last 25 years or so that I've been around, 1792 was never applied to any of my other developments.
I think it also applied, and Ray doesn't know about him because he wasn't involved in these projects, but Gilberry Ridge and Sandy Woods, I believe we used the same code interpretation during those reviews before you. That was with like Pat Sissel, so it's a different engineering firm, but we did use those on some other subdivisions in the last year and a half.
okay, but the code interpretation didn't come up. We just applied them and they said, well, okay, and moved on. Okay,
right,
so
no one's pushed the limits.
right.
Now we're sort of, hey, wait, does this really apply? And so we've paid extra money to bring this in front of you tonight.
At the end of the day, I'm glad you pointed it out, because I actually missed it when it said 25-inch circumference. It'd be nice if we were consistent between DBH and circumference throughout the code, but because that's essentially we're talking about 8-inch trees versus 11-inch trees, what we're boiling it down to. That's at the end of the day. Are we we're really concerned about 8, 9, 10-inch trees versus 11-inch trees? Because that's how it happens. That's what's going to happen when you get to the ground.
Right.
Any other questions while I'm standing up here? Or? No? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, nobody else jumped up quickly as a proponent. Any opponent testimony? And I understand some of you are maybe just here to listen to the process as well. So, name and address.
Mac Eben, 5360 Southeast Chase Road, Gresham, Oregon, 97080. Obviously, I wasn't planning on saying anything. I'm working with Corey on the development. I'm a home builder. guess I'm saying something because I want to make sure that I'm on the record and preserve my rights.
Mhm.
But I'm also looking at another piece of property here in the city of Sandy that's an overgrown Christmas tree farm. And the trees are planted too close together. There's a lot of problems with them because it's an overgrown Christmas tree farm. If this code is applied to that, I'm not sure what I'm be able to do with it because it's unclear. I don't know which direction to go. And I'm also on the tree committee because I see the two different sides of it, and I want to figure out a solution to this, but I think until that's figured out, you know, we need to kind of stay with what's been done in the past for the last couple of decades and work with staff and with the other people on the committee to try to find a resolution to this problem that is going to give us clear, concise direction moving forward. Not only for this project, but for, you know, other projects in the future and, you know, honestly for several pieces of property that I'm currently looking at to hopefully develop and build subdivisions in. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Buzz Ortiz, and my family owns about 40 acres of property in the city of Sandy, inside the city limits. And I would like some clarification on this, you know, because we'll probably be looking at trying to develop some of that property in the near future. And I just wanted to go on the record that I would really like to have clarification.
You need your address.
Yeah.
Address.
Your address,
Could you give us your
Buzz?
address for the record?
Address is 41525 Southeast Vista Road, here in Sandy.
Thank you. Okay, if you're not, we also give opportunity if you're neither for it or against it and would like to speak. Now, we'll give you opportunity now. All right. Do you have any recap on that particular issue? Or on this
I have quite a
issue?
bit. I don't know what Emily has.
Yeah, I'll start.
I do.
Actually,
And I do something.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I normally, I forgot my one line that I normally say is, you have to jump quickly.
Bonnie Gray, 19270 Southeast Jacoby Road. And I didn't plan on speaking at all today, but I definitely would like clarification on this. We were recently annexed into the city. We've had people from the city out to talk about the trees, and it just seems like what's being applied isn't what was discussed. And yeah, I'm definitely against what's being proposed here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? All right.
I'm Ryan Newman, the project arborist. for the
Address?
site. 4933 Southeast Henry Street, Portland, Oregon 97206. I don't want to be for or against the
That's
code,
fine.
but I would like to say that I did work on the Jewelberry Road project and several projects in Sandy over the years, and we've always used the 11-inch or greater trees. And so it has been confusing over the last year because we've gone back and then re-inventoried trees 8 inches and greater. So it should, in my opinion, it should be a hard rule at that limit of what size trees we should inventory, so we don't have to do the same work multiple times, because it becomes expensive and redundant. And if I could speak about this project in particular, where in the staff's response, they wanted to see 10 additional trees 8 inches or greater retained. I would just like to point out that in our tree preservation table, we are preserving 13.
You're right.
Yes.
I think we might talk about that.
Talk about that later?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all for now.
Okay.
Then. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Anders. I'm at 19098 Southeast Jacoby. I'm on the property that's just borders this property of the subdivision. And I built my home there 10 years ago, and this whole interpretation affected me. I had over 600 trees I had to inventory in the property, and I only took out 35 of them just to build the house. So we had a huge number of trees that it was just all these different sizes, and it was a big problem that I agree that it's kind of a big interpretation problem. So I just want to come down record.
Are you north, south, east, or
I'm on the
west?
north. I'm
North
on-
side, okay.
I'm on the north side of the property. Is that right?
The top, on the top.
I'm on the top. Well, I'm downhill.
Oh.
That's still north.
Yeah.
That's still north.
Yeah, that's still, I'm right on the property line of the subdivision. Of the subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a point of clarification for him?
Sure.
I didn't work here when that occurred, so I want to know what the interpretation was at the time.
Oh.
So Tim Anders to the
asked
north, and he built a house. So I don't know what interpretation he got, because that's Tracy was the planning director at the time, and I don't know.
I mean, why would
I'm
you
a little-
have
I'm a
to
little
inventory
confused.
all the trees on the lot if you only was gonna add a building spot?
Correct.
that's certain big?
So I'm a little confused
Yeah.
what he was made to do, because I don't even know, because I didn't work here at the time.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he was being asked to inventory a lot more trees than just 11-inch trees, is what I'm getting at.
Oh yeah, I had to inventory a lot of trees.
Yeah. So
I have an acre and a half of them, so it's mostly, it's all trees except for where we directly have the house.
So my only point being that I don't know what the interpretation at that time
Right.
was, but it sounds like it was not just using 102, so.
Okay.
I'd like to address that. I was.
We have the
there.
information.
Obviously, he said he wasn't. But, I mean, I don't remember his specific case, but I've never applied anything but 17102 the time, the 15 years I was at the city of Sandy. So, yeah, I mean, he probably looked at a lot of different trees because he needed to clear a spot for his house, but there's no retention requirement that it had anything to do other than 11 inches and greater. That's the only code there is or ever was.
Okay, now can we go to staff recap?
Do you want to summarize first? Or? Okay.
I'll just make a couple points and then turn it over to Kelly. So, I mean, I would agree that specific section of 1792 is a little subjective. It says, you know, should preserve trees to the greatest extent practicable and integrate them into the design of the development. I don't think that we're being unpractical in the way we have been applying this. So if you look at the trees here, the ones in the upper right-hand corner in green are the ones being proposed to be retained. I think there's 60-something of them total. They're not all in good condition. Some of them are in poor condition or whatever. So of those 60, I think only about 30 are qualifying. The remaining trees are all being removed at this point. That's, I think, over 450 of them. So that balance is, you know, I don't think we're skewing it towards every single 8-inch tree by any means is needing to be preserved. And in fact, what's prompting the more tree retention on this is that a lot of the ones they've chosen either are on the property line or the arborist report indicates there's trunk decay or they have wind throw potential, meaning they might get knocked over by wind, things like that. And so we were just asking for a few more. We're finding in every single subdivision, inevitably, a bunch of the retention trees end up coming down anyway. So I think it's probably good practice to have some extras. The standard is at least 3 per acre. You know, I mean, it could be 20 per acre with that statement. So I think we're not being unpracticable or unreasonable here in the way that we are interpreting it. As far as the intent of 17102 and 1792. I obviously can't speak to that because I wasn't here during the creation of either of those two chapters, but I want to reiterate what David was mentioning, which is, it's somewhat of a moot point because the code is what it is, and we're working with what was written and what was adopted. And again, it doesn't say anything about not applying to subdivisions. 17102 doesn't specifically say that it does apply to subdivisions. So I don't think there's really anything in the current code as it's written that says that we shouldn't be applying 1792. There's also other sections of 1792 besides this, so that's where our street trees and all the specifications for that comes into play. It includes revegetation standards, performance bond. There's a bunch of other things in 1792 that are relevant that we do review. So this is not the only thing. And then just one other point, we have been using the 8 inches or greater DBH trees. And I guess from our standpoint, we are thinking this is giving the applicants more flexibility and that sometimes there aren't enough 11-inch DBH trees in good condition on the site. So for Marshall Ridge, which we talked about, we did allow some 8 inches, and that helps them meet the retention standards. So to me, that's kind of a win-win. It's nice to get a variety of tree sizes, so that you don't lose them all at once or anything. So I think that's just an extra flexibility. Kelly?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out, and I think the tree committee saw this, and everybody on planning commission saw this too when we brought the proposed code changes that we were kind of told to revisit and look at more in greater detail. But basically every subdivision that we've been approving is having issues. The tree standards in 102 don't work at all. The 10 foot from a trunk, you're in the critical root zone automatically, and those trees die within 3 to 4 years. The limbs start falling off, causing issues with damaging the buildings, and we've went through this extensively with you guys already. So if we were to just look at 102 and apply that and say that code section could stand on its own and serve the purposes of tree preservation, I think you could get a pretty fast argument from staff based on pictures, analysis, tree removal, that has not been the case here. So whether, like Emily said, I don't know if the intention was for 17102, as Tracy has pointed out, to be the only guiding code chapter for tree retention in subdivisions. But I think if it was, that would be kind of a bad thing from what we've been seeing. I think with interpreting 1792 as being also applicable, like Emily pointed out, we're giving them flexibility with allowing trees smaller than 11 inches to count towards the retention standards and giving more flexibility in design because of that. As Emily also pointed out, 1792 is also the section where it talks about street trees and refers to a street tree list that's adopted by the city. And it also has some other information within that code section. If you go to 1792-10C, Tracy is correct in that it says significant plant, tree, and tree specimens should be preserved to the greatest extent practicable. It goes on in that section to say several times the word shall. So some of that section is mandatory or prescriptive. Some of it's not. I'll just leave it at that for you guys to kind of interpret why they switch back and forth in that single paragraph on should and shall. A pre-application notes, they're never made to be comprehensive. I don't like that. It's not ideal from my standpoint that somebody on staff said, oh, only do the 11-inch trees, and then we came back later and said 8-inch. That happens, though, unfortunately. And I sympathize with, Corey and Mac, and that might have cost them some more money. I understand that. But I don't think that alone should take away from the fact that 1792 should be applying when we're looking at subdivisions. Another thing that was kind of brought up is that Sue Barker, who was a couple planning directors before me, and Tracy, they both interpreted this code differently than I'm interpreting it, and that current staff is. And I think that's fine. I think that's why you guys are here as a body for these circumstances such as tonight to determine, do you agree with staff's current interpretation of the code, or do you agree with more of what was applied for, the 17, 18 years before that? What I can tell you is we looked pretty extensively at the ordinances and the findings and everything else that were actually adopted, and we ran those by Mr. Doofman as well, and there's nothing that we can find stating that 1792 nor other code sections should be applicable. So typically when you adopt code regulations, if you wanted to exempt a certain chapter, 17102 findings or somewhere in that ordinance would have said, basically with adoption of 17102, 1792 is not applicable to subdivisions or partitions or whatever else you wanted to lay out there. We can't find any evidence that was done. So maybe during the meetings with Mr. Picking or anybody else, it was discussed that that section or that code chapter shouldn't apply, but I don't have anything in writing that was adopted by City Council stating such. So, and that's why we talked to Mr. Doofman, and that's why we came to the conclusion that's before you tonight. So, you know, whether you decide to uphold staff's interpretation or not, I mean, we're going to live with it either way. It's your guys' decision. And I do agree with a few people that have stated that hopefully this tree committee that we formed, and Hollis is on that, will actually make all of this much clearer. But if you look at our comp plan and you look at the goals of being a Tree City USA and all the other things I think that we're trying to do, you know, as far as ecology preservation and things like that, I think not applying 1792 and basically saying, let's wipe more trees out and let's not try to save trees to the greatest extent practical, I don't think you're really probably achieving what the comp plan wants or what the goals of this city and community are. But again, that's up for you guys to decide that. So, and that's, I think, the staff summary there.
Okay. Discussion among
Yes.
us.
Okay, so I do have a question for staff. So the 8-inch one is to allow for diversity of if they're not enough of the 11-inch?
It doesn't say that specifically, that's just how we've kind of been applying it a little bit. So if you remember like Marshall Ridge, I think they didn't have enough 11 inchers. They had to ask for a tree variance anyway.
Right.
And plant some mitigation trees. But they did have some that were 8-inch in good condition that we did allow to count. So I think it just gives a little more flexibility. But yeah, I mean, I can't answer like why this is citing 8-inch and the other one cites 11-inch. I don't know the answer to that.
Just a process question. Do we need to have them to have a chance to comment back on the rebuttal before we discuss?
Yeah, I forgot.
Just wanted to say a couple things. Yeah, I mean, I just, before I came, I did a pretty exhaustive look at 1792 because I was wondering about street trees. And there is a section in 17100, which is the land division section that speaks to street trees. So with that kind of question in my mind, I don't see any language in 1792 that would be applicable necessarily to subdivisions because the street tree question is already addressed in 17100. So the code, there's duplication in a variety of sections, but that is taken care of. So I mean, it sounds like to me that, you know, there's recognition that maybe the current standards don't work in chapter 17.1 and 2, and that's the whole purpose for having a committee. But it isn't, I don't think, correct to now pull an end run and pull another section in that really was never intended to be applicable. I did find there was supposed to be some additional code modifications done at the same time that 17102 was adopted. And this is just another example of kind of the intent. For whatever reason, I don't know what the reason was, it was never adopted. And there was supposed to be a section, and I included this in some of my exhibits. There was a sentence at the end of that 1792-10C, the section we're talking about that has trees to the greatest extent practicable. And what that language said is trees required to be retained under the provisions of chapter 17102 shall be incorporated into the landscape plan and may be counted towards the minimum landscape area required under section 1792-20. 1792-20 is a section that talks about percent of landscaping for, you know, multifamily and commercial and things like that. And so if that language had been included, I think it would have been absolutely clear that this section, chapter 1792, is really intended to be landscaping, and the tree language in there should never be applied to subdivisions because it's talking about a landscape plan. And really there isn't a landscape plan requirement in subdivisions. So that's the only thing I would bring up. And I guess the flexibility, this is the only subdivision I've worked on since I left, and so I'm not sure of the flexibility. Staff is kind of making it sound like if you don't have enough trees, or you want to save trees smaller than 11, you can substitute 8, but I don't think that's how it's being applied. I think they're looking at it in addition to 11 inches and greater, 3 trees per acre.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I add some? So at the subdivision stage, there are cases where you actually have landscape plans. There's actually several. In subdivisions, we do parking courts sometimes. We only have one of those so far in town, Pioneer Meadows. It actually had a landscape plan that we approved prior to final plat, and they had to have all the landscaping installed per 1792 prior to me signing the plat. We do have storm detention ponds, which have landscaping methodologies and requirements, and sometimes they're as simple as trees and other things that actually we pull out of 1792 to apply to those. And then we also have common pathways that sometimes have landscaping installed in them. So there are instances, in addition to street trees, where we actually enforce landscaping regulations in tracks within a subdivision. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
And Kelly, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So just, if you don't mind, just a couple points, and I won't belabor this anymore. I think it's been, talked about, and I think that's good. It's good to, try to figure out what the intent here is. On that point about 1792, I would just say to the Planning Commission that really the core, if I'm following, what's been thought, in terms of the interpretation, is really down to, the tree retention issue in 1792. And it would be my recommendation that, however this plays out, that, as Kelly said, there are other standards in 1792 that are at times applicable, and I don't think those, should be discounted in the context of a subdivision review. The other issue I would just point out, Tracy had mentioned that language that might have been added to 1792 when Chapter 102 was adopted, and as you said, it's not clear why it wasn't. But I sort of think that goes both ways. I mean, yes, that would have clarified things in terms of how it applies with respect to 1792, but for whatever reason, and that's way beyond my memory banks, it wasn't. And so does that in and of itself suggest an intent that the council, thought that 1792 should still be in play? I don't know. I think it's fair to say that this is not a very clear issue. I mean, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have spent this much time talking about it. And so, from our point of view, as much about as we sort of started out with, not looking for necessarily an outcome by putting 1792 in play, but just recognizing that it isn't clear as the code is written that it does not apply, kind of consistent with what Kelly said. You'd expect to see some language in 102 or in 92 somewhere that would say, hey, when you're considering tree preservation, only consider that, don't consider this. Mm-hmm. I think it's a given, going forward with the results of what the committee that's now diligently studying this and coming up with new standards. That'll be something we certainly keep in mind and make sure that tension or that conflict, that ambiguity is resolved. But at this point, I think probably the best thing for everybody is just getting some direction in terms of what the Planning Commission is thinking about this.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that. So I think David's point's very good, that if you do decide to go with what the applicant's requesting and say 1792 is not applicable to tree preservation, I think we need to be very clear that, as pointed out by Mr. Picking, we would still define that 1792 is applicable to subdivisions, because if you take away that, then we have no way of even enforcing or monitoring subdivisions, landscaping improvements in tracks or anything else. So I think we need to be very clear on the code interpretation.
So that motion would have to be. Discussion?
You guys always look at me.
You should always have something to say.
Well, obviously, the first guy in the platoon usually gets shot, and I'm usually the guy that starts out, so. What really comes to my mind is when, I believe it was mentioned, maybe Tracy said it, somebody said it, it took 4 years to develop 17102. Why? You want to get something done, get it done. We have a group that's been, I guess, put together by the previous mayor and your meeting, right? Well, we could interpret this and stuff, but there isn't the solution to get on the stick and get it done. Set up a timeline, get it done, and get a draft in front of the commission and the council in 3 months. That's what frustrates me, is that we all have seen this as we've been on the commission, Jerry and I, for quite a while. If you can go through our code, and I guarantee you can find some conflicts. And it frustrates those guys to tears. And so we end up interpreting them all the time. So this is one of them. So we need to make an interpretation so that these folks and the other folks can move on in the meantime. But it concerns me is that we make an interpretation, and then that interpretation lasts for 4 years until the committee wants to get something done. So one question I would have is does the committee have a charter, and do they have a deadline at which they're supposed to provide something back to council or to us?
Well, actually, that was one of the things that
So why not? It's just an ongoing, let's all get together for coffee if we can all get together and have a quorum kind of a thing. I'm a planner. I spend as much time planning as Tracy has. My entire Forest Service career, 50 years was in planning, plus, my private consultant. So, I've been planning for subdivisions, but that's why I'm here, wildland fire planning. And 20 years of it was in contract. And, we basically set deadlines and got stuff done. So that's one of my frustrations in terms of, why we're up to what we're doing. We could do, as I think David suggested, if you feel that you want to kind of resolve this, I'm going to say in favor of the applicant, you could say that section 10C, it doesn't apply to subdivisions, but the rest of it does. I guess that's what David said. Or the other one, you could say the whole thing applies. That's really that's the two choices that I see there on the table. But what frustrates me is the fact that we're going to be here for 2 years every subdivision talking about this. And so I believe our mayor, our current mayor, when he was campaigning, said he had a question about, well, you're really busy. You think you can get this done? His comment was, well, you always get something done if you ask a busy person to do it. So I challenged the new mayor to pick up where the old mayor constructed a committee and to get something done. Give a deadline, get something done.
Yeah,
Don't just talk about it.
I think one of the hard parts you're going to find, though, is the committee that was formed. There's a lot of people in the room with probably differences of opinion on what the code should finally look like. Yeah, and that's a good thing. But that also means that it's going to take some time to come to consensus on what the code's going to look like.
Yeah, you can, not to beat a dead horse, but I was here with Jerry a while back, and we built something called the Sandy Style. And we had a group twice as big as this, similar folks in the room shooting rocks at us when we first started. And we said, and I remember making this suggestion, wait a minute, why don't we stop back for a second? Let's put 2 people from each zone together, as you recall, and let's form a working committee, and let's get this done. Let's have like 4 meetings, get it done. And within 10 months, wasn't it? Less than 10 months. They had consensus, and they were back here. And Ron, who's not here today, was out there, and that's why he's here today, because he got involved in the process. My point is that if you want to make it happen, you can make it happen. Okay, so I would challenge the people, if you're willing to be on the committee, you should be willing to set a deadline and get it done. And you don't solve things that are different by not meeting and hammering them out, you do it, and facilitate a process. We did it well in the Sandy style. And, we came up with something that everybody could support, but they didn't necessarily all agree on. That's what consensus is. So that's my frustration, I guess. This is a symptom of it, but that's my frustration is that, we need to just get these conflicts taken care of in the code and
The sooner the better.
set up meetings, and if you're going to be part of the process, be there. Get a good facilitator, move on. But the other, I guess, the thing that keeps bugging me a little bit, at the top of this, the title says all code, all zones, okay? That none of in the text says this applies to all zones. But I think you addressed that in the fact that, generally code applies to all zones unless it says otherwise. I mean, it's, because we do have code that does. I am perplexed with what Tracy brought up, that over on 1792-20, there's a table here that gives some numbers.
That's my big.
And they seem to like to beat up on R3, and they let R1 and R2 and single-family residential off the hook. Well, what's the purpose of beating up on R3 and mobile home park if it doesn't apply to another one? So it's just an example of conflict that makes you scratch your head on it. So, was this all zones? I mean, when the first thing was first entered, did it have all zones at the top? Did it somehow creep in with other edits down the line? I mean, looking back, way back at when it first came up. But, if you look at it clerically, I know Tracy said there's between should and shall. I agree. I've put more policy, and my Forest Service COR always told me that the contractor or the government shall and the contractor will. I mean, those, you want to start mixing words. But, so this is all zones up here, and then he picks on should versus shall. I mean, I understand the difference, and I also understand the word practical. I've written that many times, to the greatest extent practical. What you're trying to do is give people a little bit of wiggle room. So I don't see any problem with that set of terms. Because what they're trying to say is do your darndest in the first sentence, and then once you've done your darndest, then the ones you picked, then shall down the road. So that's the way I interpret that first sentence versus the rest.
Okay. I think John has a list over here. Fire away.
Fire away. I'll be repeating an awful lot of things that have been said here tonight, but in 102, we've all heard a bunch of times that it doesn't explicitly say that subdivisions, nor does it say that it supersedes 1792. 1792 says all zones. There's landscaping littered everywhere, and then when you go to this table on landscaping percentages, it doesn't list all zones, and especially the subdivision we're talking about tonight. Tracy makes a really compelling argument on 102 in this case over 92, is in my eyes. And then in the initial pre-application meeting, 102 is what was suggested, and then later on came back with 92. It's all over the place. I'd probably lean more on the 102 than the 92 in this case.
It's important that that tonight, though, right now, right, we're discussing for everyone, not for this particular.
The code, correct.
The code, not for this particular development that's coming in. Well, a couple of thoughts, and it kind of goes to one of the things that you said, which is it's our job to interpret the code and the intent of what, say, City Council wanted, and that we're looking at the comp plan, and that we're a Tree City USA, and that our knowledge base has changed over time too. So what we know now about trees and tree retention is different than it was. We were talking about how things were applied 17 years ago. Well, things are different now. And that's part of why we're having the tree committee, is so that we can get a group of people around the table to discuss what we know now that we didn't know 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and how we're going to apply it. So what you said about let's get it done, I think right now we've got a lot, I mean, we're growing so fast, and we've got a lot of developments that are happening and are going to continue to happen. And if the tree committee meets and it takes us a year or two to get anything up to city council and approved by city council, there's going to be a lot of developments and therefore a lot of trees either cut down or not cut down between now and then.
There could be, there could not be. You know, we went through a time in the 2000s, we were meeting twice a month, and we were doing 2 subdivisions, and it was like, you know, and then the recession hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, what's driving them now is the overgrowth boundary increase.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's, I think, driving the motivation for the people that want to develop now.
Mm-hmm. But I was
assuming that there's people out there that'll buy them, so that could go down in a heartbeat. So, but the point is it shouldn't take a year or two to look at code. When did you bring that to us with the other 4?
November, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you worked on it all last year, and you're gonna snap your fingers. It's gonna be November, and they all met and had coffee, and nothing's ever come of it.
Well, I don't.
So the point is that, you know, by November of this year, there ought to be all those clarifications fixed. I mean, whatever do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't assume that they're just meeting and drinking coffee. The conversation we had the other day was actually a very good conversation, and it spurred some good questions for us to ask council to get feedback on prior to moving forward with adopting code regulations. It's not, I don't think it's going to be a 4-year cycle. It better not be. I don't intend on it being that long.
If you don't set a deadline, it will be.
Yeah.
well, Donna, it's a really good group that they put together.
Oh,
It's
I'm
like
questioning
a
the
lot of
group.
people.
I'm not questioning the group, but you told me there's no deadline.
Well, there
There's
isn't.
no deadline.
I think the deadline is when we write a good code and we agree with a consensus with the people in this room.
But deadlines.
There's like 3 or 4 committee members here. Then I think that will be the deadline, essentially.
Well, deadlines drive consensus, and deadlines drive something getting done. So.
I don't know if that's what we're here to talk about tonight,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
We are not.
Yeah.
No.
we're
Yeah.
not.
Well,
We're trying to solve one problem while we're revealing 12 others.
anyway, so I mean, each of us spoke our piece. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Let's just get going here.
From a really, not a surface level, it's hard, it would be hard to interpret something against what it says in the title of all zones. It would just be difficult for me to say this doesn't apply to all zones, when in fact it says all zones. But having said that, there is enough testimony and evidence of there being confusion, which would then push me towards being able to make an interpretation that perhaps would go against what's even in the exact words on the thing. I think it was something you said that would be, I'm wondering if interpreting on C, 1792-10C, as I'm just throwing out ideas to kind of get us some thought and to move us forward. Writing it out as not being applicable to subdivisions, but retaining everything else. But in our motion, really pointing towards 102, realizing that does not solve the problem forever.
Yeah, I mean, that's what David suggested.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'd ask Kelly is, you gave some examples of where this would apply in a subdivision. So are there, you know, you talked about, you know, the stormwater retention, et cetera, okay? To do what you need to do in those areas, do you still need C?
Not if you're not, well, if you're going to, so the rest of 1792 would be applicable to subdivisions, but not one specific section?
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying I see 2 simple options. One is the clerical one, which says all zones, that's it, you know. just black and white.
I mean,
But
yeah,
the
I mean,
other option is
we're not
to-
here to make a code change tonight. We're here to just interpret how staff's going to apply the code.
But what I'm asking you is if we had a motion that said this does apply to subdivisions except
C.
section C.
Yeah.
We said that. Would that impact you in terms of being able to do what you need to do as far as landscaping in
In
these
tracks?
areas you've
No.
mentioned?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I guess what I'm saying is it does apply to subdivisions. It's just we're going to take this section and say it
Right.
doesn't.
Correct. That's what we would, and
Yeah.
probably the motion would be helpful, if we're heading that direction, the motion would be helpful to kind of underscore that our interpretation is that it does apply to subdivisions, but we're going to exclude, it sounds like, section C.
Yeah, I'll throw a motion out. Rebecca's ready. I move that we interpret Chapter 12.92 to apply to all zones, including subdivisions, but that Section 17.92.10, subsection C, not apply to residential subdivisions.
Just to residential subdivisions?
Yeah,
Or to all
I'm looking for the right words there.
I mean, I don't know. It's
David,
Yeah.
can we do that?
The question was whether it's just to residential subdivisions?
Or would be better to say the zones not apply to single-family residential R1 and R2?
Well, I guess the way I would look at it, I don't, to me, I don't know that there's a lot of support in the code for making that sort of distinction. To me, it would be just that you would basically be finding that the tree retention standards of 102 govern subdivisions over the language in 9210C.
So you'd like to see a little different motion?
Well, to me, I think that's what you're trying to say, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that basically, you've heard the different arguments, and that on balance, when it comes to tree preservation or tree retention in a subdivision context, regardless of what type of subdivision it might be, that those standards are found in 102, not in 9210C.
Okay.
That's a question. I mean, I think that's what you're saying, but I guess I'm looking for yes or no.
Okay, so if we were to say like you said, I'll just paraphrase for the moment, that the tree retention standards in section 102, the motion is that they apply to subdivisions and not the tree retention standards in 92. Is that it short, what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yes, I mean, if that were the route you went, that's how I would structure the motion. Yes.
Is the word subdivisions the right word we want to use?
I think so, because I think that was ultimately the interpretation question, was the belief that 92 does not apply. The tree retention standards in 92 don't apply to subdivision.
Yeah.
So that's,
That's the motion.
You want to take David's motion?
so
Yeah, this is why we pay him the big bucks, and why we generally have him write the motion, and we say, yeah, I said that. Okay, so,
I mean,
so,
you're basically saying 102 is applicable for subdivisions, and 9210C is not applicable in
for the
subdivisions.
tree retention standards, that the tree retention standards in 1792,
10.
excuse me, the tree retention standards in 17102 are the standards to apply to subdivisions versus the tree retention standards in 1792.
Or actually just reference C, and don't even have to say
1792
that paragraph.
10C.
10C.
Right. That's right.
What was your question? So we're just taking this out, the motion that's almost on the floor, with a David tweak.
Would be taking this out.
This, well, it would still be here in the code, but
Right.
by our interpretation,
But not
it is
for
not applied to
residential.
subdivision, not just subdivisions.
And then what's the retention for the subdivisions then? If it's
Then
not
they
this one,
are
it's
here
gonna
in
be the
102.
102. Okay.
We're just underscoring 102 for subdivisions and saying that this paragraph C
Okay.
is not, we are not holding it to subdivisions.
The reason I asked the question, I was a little stuck on the word subdivision. I quickly whipped to the definition section, and we don't define a subdivision.
Yeah, it's defined under land.
It's like, when you
It's
see one, you
defined,
know what it
yeah.
is, but that's why I was
It's
fishing for
defined.
zone.
Go to
Subdivision.
land division and then go to partition and subdivision, it's in there.
So it's-
If you say so.
It is, I actually looked earlier tonight too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're
It is hard to
comfortable-
find though, I will admit.
Yeah. Okay, so, you want to kind of amend your motion to agree with what David said?
I amend my motion, agree with what David said.
Second.
It's actually been seconded. Do you understand, do you have the wording of the motion enough there, Rebecca?
I do, thank you.
Excellent,
Got it.
excellent. Roll call vote?
All right, Commissioner Carlton.
Yes.
Commissioner McLean Wenzel.
Yes.
Commissioner Logan.
Yes.
And Chairman Crosby.
Yes, motion carries. Okay,
Can we take 5?
Yeah.
Before we go on
Wanna
to the
take 5?
variances?
Okay.
That allows some of these people to leave.
Yeah,
We're gonna
they
take
leave.
five minutes, David.
leave
Yeah, thanks for fine, I'll be
judiciously.
here.
Okay, thanks.
Restroom.
Yeah.
Might be longer by the time everybody goes.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, all I can go off of what it says in there. I mean, that's why they're good though. Just to do interpretation.
I feel like I'm gonna knock this off the wall. But I think my shoulders are first.
It's still at least 10% minimum of the previous.
I can read it for you. I just stop.
And
you're right.
I know, but it's a minimum of 10 feet.
So like you're a kid.
Our friends that go with us are not calling. But we're sitting there and our way out. So how are you going to retire?
Stop.
Well, you know, after one, it's actually, I
You know what it
say,
is? It's like someone walking in and them thinking that someone's pregnant. So it's like, this is your house.
I was like,
I remember saying such a.
I remember my first time that somebody called them. It was about the same as that.
I mean, that's kind of shocking at first.
Yeah.
But it kind of like positive. So when you go out, you're like, so this is what I'm coming for.
you're gonna get started.
It was probably what some kid that was probably barely 20, correct? Unfortunately, no, it was like 35. I mean, you look way, there's no way. That shocks me. No. Your husband came in the other day and paid and he said, oh, yeah. He looked good. He looked like he was doing good. I know.
Go on, John. Your daughter running? Is she running track? She will. Oh, okay.
Me neither. As it was happening, I was shocked. I was like, I know, because he's from Australia.
Solid, exactly.
What is it? The big one? Okay, well, I don't, I probably can't fix it, but I'll let you know, it's good to know, I appreciate it, because I don't know until you guys are.
Not the easy part?
Oh.
Is it on?
So it's connected on that end, see right here? There's no signal.
Nothing.
My cord wandered over there.
Yeah.
You know, it's got whatever the.
Right.
Really cool.
No, the 8 inches is the interpretation of 25
You know, he
inches.
said it's stacked, he goes, okay.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it wasn't even like it's like,
Yeah.
That's what
And I looked at the thing, it shows nothing.
I mean,
Windows or
I thought. What's the purpose of that? The new construction, you and I.
Right, and then I thought about it, I thought, you know, if it had come in, nothing built, okay? He just comes in and says, I want to build a car thing for
Probably would have got something because we didn't design
And,
this.
well, see, that's the point. Even though it wasn't in our purview to look at the design, I know that if the person came in and said, I want to do this, we would have said, what's it going to look like? I think we would ask that question. Even if we technically couldn't, it would behoove them to come in and say, and here's what it's going to look like.
Behind it, they got exactly down there with in it, but it's temporary. It's just one of those temporary things. And so you get stuck between temporary and permanent.
I also wonder, this has nothing to do with it, but he said, yeah, my father was building and all I could think of was, you know, his father said, yeah, man, let's build this thing like a fort, you know? You don't
Next hurricane won't take this sucker out.
You know?
So if one of those applies, then will developers have to follow this?
Yeah, actually they do now.
They do now.
Right.
We also, we have this.
I don't know that they're upset. I think they were conflicted with this right there.
Yes.
And that threw them as well. If that means all zones, then I've got to do this. And they recognize I've got a conflict
But then you wonder why all zones aren't listed in the table. And that's the confusing part for me.
Yeah, I wondered the same thing. I would think it should have had every zone. Every zone.
I saw that and
Yeah.
it's okay, all zones. Oh, but then it says this, so.
Why haven't you mentioned the other?
So instead of being ambiguous on tree size, now we know. And Kelly put together, or Tracy put together a nice cheat sheet on the dues.
Okay, we're going to do as we said and kind of roll back the order for the public hearing, and now basically expose to discussion the variances. I think is the primary thing that we'll be looking at. Can you put up that page that has the list of variances? At least somebody else may want something else.
Page 3.
Yeah. So, do you have anything more on staff report as far as that aspect of it? Okay. Applicant on those issues?
You recommended all 3 for approval, right?
Variances,
Yeah.
yes.
All the variances.
Yes.
With conditions, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy Brown, for Drive. So yeah, we definitely agree with the staff's recommendation on the variances. You know, we do have some concerns with some of the conditions. So I'll be referring to the sheet that I handed out at the beginning of my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of divided it into, so that in that document, the items that are, so the staff recommendations are all numbered, and I have those in a different font than the response. And so the items that are in bold are the ones that we have concerns about, we'd like to talk about. I'll bring up those. So I'd initially wanted to do it in the order. In my introduction, I was going to talk about the fish overlay and the trail conditions first, and then the trees, and then some planning, general planning related, and engineering. But I'd like to talk about the trees first, just because we have the arborist here and he wants to get home. So the conditions that are related to the trees are number 1, 2, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. And so I'll go through those, and then I'll have him talk about the trees from the arborist perspective. So I guess 1 has kind of been taken off the list now, since you just made the interpretation that, I don't know, I'm not sure. I guess we'll have to figure out what one should be revised or not based on this. But at least 1792-10C doesn't apply.
Correct.
So number 2, there's 2 trees that are identified. Maybe we can pull up the tree plan. It's easier to search that. So tree number 510 and 516 are right at the.
Yeah, thanks.
So, right here, 510, 516.
Okay.
So we have some additional information from the project arborist to talk about those. We agree that those trees can be retained, and we're just, actually this kind of brings up since I'm thinking about it, 1792-10 doesn't apply. The tree protection standard also changed. So the 5 feet beyond the drip line is now no longer applicable. It's 10 feet from the trunk of the tree. So that may not be an issue in this case, but I will bring the arborist up in a second to talk about what we're proposing for those trees. We intend to protect those trees, but we aren't able to meet the standard of the 5 feet beyond the drip line, and so he has some testimony. Then I'll go on to
14.
Number 14. So this is just a repeat of number 2, and so we'll talk about that in a little more detail. So number 15, this is talking about some additional trees that are being proposed. So what we did is went through an analysis, based on the area of the property, and that requires a minimum of 29 trees. And so there's some of the trees that have been identified by staff as kind of questionable because they're close to the line, or they've been identified as viable but with some potential defects. So I guess to address that first, I'd like to refer you to Exhibit A and B of what we provided of the tree retention. So it's a blow up of the tree retention regarding where the line is. So this is just in the thing I handed out. It's not online.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just in what I handed out. So the last page is what I handed out.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So in that, so the staff was concerned that some of the trees might be over the line or not on the line or on the line. So this exhibit is intended to show, at least Exhibit A, that 2 of the trees in question are actually on our side of the line. The one tree, 3006, is probably right on the line. And then if you look at the other exhibit, all of the other trees that staff had identified as a concern about, they're all on our side of the line. So, I guess what we're saying in that is those trees should be included as retained trees in the scheme of things. There was also mention that some of the trees had some additional notes by the arborist regarding their viability. And I'll bring him up in a second to talk about what he meant in his notes. So I guess the other part of this condition had some recommendations. So I guess the conclusion by staff was we weren't meeting the tree retention requirements. And so based on the analysis we did in here, we're actually exceeding now the tree requirements are very clearly, as you made your interpretation, 3 trees per acre, 11 inches and greater. And so we're proposing to retain 34 trees, 11 inches and greater, all in a viable condition, where we're required to retain 29. And in addition, in that whole forest protection area, there's at least additional 11 trees that are in the 8 to 10 inch category. So we far exceed the requirements. In that condition, staff had kind of presented a few options for, if we didn't make the retention requirements for retaining some additional trees. One was to give up lot number 19. One was to retain some trees. They're kind of circled there in the middle of the slide in green. And then there's another option along the west property line. And there's some problems with those options. I guess the bottom line, we don't need additional trees. We comply. But there are some serious problems with those options because the first one, lot 19, is worth about $130,000. And there's not a requirement to give that to the city for the retention of those trees. We don't need those trees to meet the retention. The other problem with the idea of putting trees in the back of the lots, that if you look at the grading, those trees would be severely compromised by the grading that's required on the site. And then the idea of retaining trees along lots 9 and 10 on the west, that's where the primary sanitary sewer line is going, right under where that green is shown. And so I don't know if they didn't see that that wouldn't be good to be able to install those utilities. So the next condition is number 16. So that one, I guess, goes away because you rejected 1792. And number 17 as well goes away because that is the tree retention or the tree protection requirement in 1792-10, the 5 feet from the drip line. So the requirement in 17-100 is 10 feet from the base of the tree. Number 18 This is, let's see, we don't really have a problem with this. So all the trees that are proposed to be retained are within this fish overlay area. And we really don't have a problem identifying some kind of a tree protection in that area if it's needed. So at this point, I think I'll pause and have the arborist talk about some of the trees that were the question about the viability, as well as the modified tree protection zone for those couple of trees at the back of that one block.
Hi, I'm Ryan Newman again. I gave my address before, and I apologize, I think I spoke out of turn. I'd like to talk first about trees number 510 and 516, and I believe Corey handed out a copy of my arborist notes, possibly. If not, we can get those later. Trees number 510 and 516 are on the border of the FSH. And what my notes propose to do as far as tree protection is for the tree protection fence to run roughly along the FSH line. And the root protection zones of 510 and 516 are going to be truncated on that southwest side in order for a grading cut to be made that will slope away from the trees. And it shouldn't be within 10 feet of either tree. And those trees can be preserved in that way. If grading occurs within the fence, an auger should be present to prune roots as they're found. Are there any questions about those two trees?
Yeah, when you said it shouldn't,
Uh-huh.
shouldn't, don't we want it to say it won't?
It won't.
It won't happen. In other words, you're saying if it should go within the 10 feet, that an arborist is going to be present?
Exactly.
I think she's asking, why can't you say it won't?
Yeah, why, yeah, that's what I'm asking is
Oh.
why can't you just say we're
It
not,
won't be
we're, yes,
within 10 feet.
that's right.
And Hollis, the code actually says at least, you know, the code's basically saying the 10-foot that
Is a minimum.
Correct.
Well, I'm
Right.
not speaking of where, I could address where the tree protection fence will be. I agree that the 10 feet from the trunk is not gonna be enough tree
It's not
protection
enough.
for a lot of trees.
Right,
It needs to be at least the drip edge.
at least, yeah.
And the 1792 says the drip edge plus 5 feet, which I think would be ample. If other municipalities go 1 foot per inch of trunk diameter, which sometimes can be, I don't want to say excessive, but will be way outside of the drip line, depending on what species of tree it is. But I think the drip edge is a good rule. 5 feet beyond the drip edge is okay. The reason we're addressing these two trees is because we know grading will be proximate to them. And based on their size, I gave them root protection zones, and root protection zones in my table are a minimum distance of where the fence should be placed, where they can grade without an arborist present. And once they go inside beyond that number, the arborist should be there to find roots and prune them before they're contacted by the equipment to avoid damage to the tree.
Right.
So I believe that 510 and 516 can be preserved under the current plan. I'm going to move on to the other trees that were called out in the staff report because there's some question that in my tree table that I called trees, let's see here, 520, 531, 534, and 560. I wrote in the remarks section that they're viable, but then I also noted some defects such as wound on trunk, poor trunk taper, wind throw potential, poor trunk taper, some trunk decay at the creek. And those are gonna be minor defects to these trees and not reasons to, they are not reasons to not preserve these trees. And viable, in my remarks column, indicates that the trees will have value at least 10 to 20 years into the future as long as their tree protection measures are taken. So, in my notes, I write that, for example, something that says viable, but it has poor trunk taper and wind throw potential, those are helping in the planning phase. So we know that that tree, number 531, should not be preserved as an individual tree in someone's backyard, for example, because it won't survive without the rest of the stand around it. So I agree with this tree preservation plan, and I believe that retaining trees as a stand is preferable to retaining individual trees around the site. And especially in this case where you have Tickle Creek in the FSH area. Tree retention in that area is going to preserve those site characteristics and have the greatest benefits for the site because the trees are going to protect each other. The creek provide habitat corridor. And really the trees at this site have all grown in a stand. So preserving individual trees is a poor option, actually. And I think we run into that, especially in Sandy a lot, because you have large wooded lots and sometimes overgrown plantation where there used to be Christmas tree farms. So when we preserve trees, yet take away their stand, then we start dealing with issues like wind throw and tree mortality due to proximity of grading. And I would put the emphasis in these areas on replanting rather than preservation, where we're going to have extensive grading in the area. And I think that's most of what I have to say, unless there's any questions.
So I have a question. So
Sure.
on those trees where you're saying that an arborist would be there if it was gonna get too close to the root zone, are you using that orange fencing? Is this development gonna use that orange fencing, or are you gonna use a metal fence? What kind of fence is it gonna be?
Well, I think it depends on which code you go to, but my recommendation would be to use a 6-foot metal fence, which in a situation like this, if you use 6-foot T-posts and get a roll of the fence, you could easily run a fence line along the FSH area. That way you don't get equipment in there and
Compact.
stockpile materials, for example, which can impact the root zones. That's what I would recommend, because in the past, and a lot of other municipalities don't even allow the orange fence anymore, because basically it gets
knocked over.
It gets knocked over and you get foot traffic, and we really want to keep all unnecessary traffic out of the tree preservation area.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So yeah, there will be a continuous erosion control fence along the entire FSH area as well. So it may.
Tracy, what do you mean by an erosion?
That
You
the
mean the
short
orange?
little black-
The little
That
short
fence
ones?
that's buried in the ground.
Yeah.
It's so, since it is buried in the ground, it's not going anywhere. And they, you know, it's a requirement to be buried at the bottom and then dirt packed on top of it with those posts. That's needed for the erosion control. There may be some other areas that they would need to beef it up around the trees as well. Most of the trees, there's only a few trees that are right along the line. Most of the trees are further down the hill. So since there will be that erosion control at the top part of that hill, there's going to be no reason to go way down by the creek to put fencing around those trees. Nobody's going to cross the erosion control fencing to do anything. So that, I wanted to go on with some of the conditions regarding the fish overlay and the trail. I'll go to condition number 4. And so in this condition, staff is recommending that the applicant dedicate all the fish overlay to the city, and that they provide a trail connection to the future Tickle Creek Trail. So I guess the first thing I'd like to point out is this, you know, this requirement, it would be considered a taking of the applicant's property. There's nothing in the code that requires the applicant to dedicate that entire area to the city. The code does allow lots to be platted into the fish overlay. You just can't develop in the fish overlay. And so we're not showing any development in the fish overlay. It's a preserved area. So we don't have a problem putting, you know, if it's needed, a conservation easement or a tree protection ordinance or a tree protection easement on that. But to require it to be dedicated, the city really can't do that. Another problem, I guess, with that process is if you look at where the size of those lots, lot number 19, 20, and 21, if we did dedicate all of the fish overlay, those would now be substandard lots. They wouldn't meet the 7,500 square foot. I'm not sure that was thought about when that recommendation was made, but so, you know, those, there would have, in order to, unless they're talking about losing those 3 lots, and I don't think they're recommending that, you know, some of the area would have to be in the fish, and so just wanted to make sure we're of that. I guess the other part of it is this condition talks about, you know, the future connection to the Tickle Creek Trail. And so I'd like to, you could go to the second to last page of your handout. So this is from the transportation system plan. So what I did is look at both the Parks Master Plan and the transportation system plan. So I've got the overall transportation system plan. That's the current plan, and it does show some areas of the trail. So the Tickle Creek Trail is primarily in yellow, and if you go to that blow up below that, you know, I put a little identifier of where our site is. So the last segment that is off road, we'll say, is that yellow segment identified as P22, and then it connects. It's showing it connecting to an existing access easement that goes through the Timberline Trail subdivision. And so there are some sections that are shown in the transportation system plan that are outside the urban growth boundary, such as to the west, where it's showing it kind of a future connection to the Springwater Trail. So I guess the reason for bringing this up is the code is very clear that in 17A490D that where development is traversed by or adjacent to a future trail, identified within the transportation system plan, dedications of suitable width to accommodate trail linkage shall be provided. So that's very clear. You know, and if our project was right next to the trail, I think it would be clear that we would be required to make a trail connection. But since it isn't, it really can't be required for that section of the code. Otherwise, it would be considered a taking of the applicant's property. This condition also recommends the planning commission, in addition to taking the entire fish overlay, also take lot 19 to protect some additional trees in that area. And that may sound like a good idea, but lot 19 has a value to the property owner. I'm not sure exactly what the market value is, but roughly $130,000. And so it wasn't really clear if the staff was also recommending the applicant be compensated for taking that value of property. So we recommend, our recommendation is that that condition be deleted. It's really not justified, cannot be substantiated by the code, and it constitutes a taking of the applicant's property without any compensation. The next one is condition 5, and this is kind of dependent on what you decide on condition 4 regarding the taking of that property. So not only is the city asking that the applicant give that property up, they're also asking him to provide a phase 1 environmental assessment, a native vegetation report, remove invasive plants, plant native plants, maintain the property and provide a maintenance bond for 2 years, and also provide a property appraisal. And we did a kind of the back of the envelope estimate of those, the cost of all that, and that's roughly $30,000. And so that probably exceeds the cost of the fish overlay itself. Certainly doesn't exceed the cost of the lot 19, but since the fish overlay cannot be developed because it's a protected area, it's really unreasonable to require the applicant to spend money and then give the city property. So, it's, yeah, so anyway, if you read through the exhibit by the Public Works Director, his comments, and I think part of the reason the comment or the condition regarding removing invasives and native plantings was in there is because the Public Works Director expressed concerns about the city maintaining this, taking on 1.5 acres of additional property and maintaining that. And so that was a condition that was put in there, so that the city should now maintain it for this, or that the applicant should maintain it for the city. So yeah, really I think it's unclear if the Planning Commission has legal authority. I guess the other part of that condition is that the staff is recommending that the Planning Commission grant a parks fee in lieu of. And that's based on, there's a formula that you go through for park dedication, and it's the city's decision to either require the park or to collect a fee in lieu of. And so staff was recommending that the applicant get a fee in lieu of for the giving up of the fish overlay. As I pointed out, the applicant's probably paying more to give it up based on all of those requirements than they would get in fee in lieu of. And it's not really clear to me, this will be something you'll need to ask the city attorney, is whether the Planning Commission really even has the legal authority to grant fee reductions or not. I'm looking at the authority given by the Planning Commission. I don't think we do, but I'm not the attorney. So with that, we recommend or we request that this condition be removed. I don't know if you want to ask questions along the way, that's fine. But I'll continue on. So I'll go on to condition number 19. This is kind of an extension of the trail requirement. And so, you know, as I said before in the previous explanation, I don't believe that the city does have the legal authority to require the applicant to dedicate land for the fish overlay or the trail, because there's really, the trail they're referring to isn't there. It's not on any map. We know Tickle Creek is there, and could there be a trail in the future? Sure, but that needs to be shown on a plan in order to require the applicant to make a connection to it. So this number 19, I guess we did show, kind of as an effort to show how it could happen in the future and why it's best to be put on a different property than our property. I don't know if you could pull up that one slide that shows where we're proposing the trail. So maybe I'll ask Ray real quick here to just explain why we chose that location.
Again, for the record, Ray Moore, Albany Surveyors. We're always trying to look out for the next piece of property because they may be our client. So we'll get into the reason why that road, Newton Street, swoops to the south. But we also try to do our best effort when we're designing, one piece of property is look at how the next piece is going to develop to make sure we got the roads in the right spot and whatnot. So, part of the reason Woodstock is where it is was so that when it gets extended, it's not going to be into the fish overlay when it extends further to the east. So when we came up with the future street plan, and if you zoomed out, you could see that knuckle is sort of the central location for the whole future neighborhood to be able to have access to the FSH overlay. And when we looked at that, since the knuckle is right adjacent to the FSH, we provide some opportunities for a future trail if the city desires one at that time. And the reason why that's more desirable than, say, a trail, as staff has pointed out, in a linear fashion, if you look at our grading, we're like a 2-to-1 slope off of north on Woodstock. So to build a trail where those two yellow lines are, it's going to be a set of concrete steps all the way down. And even to continue north into the FSH, again, that would just be a row of steps. So as you can see, if you want to build a trail, I kind of looked at the grades from the knuckle down to the creek is about 50 feet of elevation difference. So I looked at, rise over run, what would that slope be? It would be about 6% going off the knuckle if you just run on contour, zigzagging your way down to the creek. And so if the desire is to enter a natural area, the FSH area, would one rather walk on a concrete sterile steps with handrails on each side or a meandering gravel path? So that was our logic, and I know staff wanted some explanation, so hopefully that explained it. Do you have any questions?
Now I'll just go through. So let's kind of address the conditions regarding the fish overlay and trees. I'll just go through some of the other conditions. I'll start with number 3 there. This kind of caused by surprise since we did submit a study by a wetland scientist who said there was no wetlands on the property. And we did have some conversation with the city engineer, and I believe staff has received an email from the city engineer saying that he's now not requiring that it to be concurred, and he agrees that it wasn't justified. So if you, I just included before I found that out, if you go to the 3rd page from the end, he kind of referred to the National Wetland Inventory and the local wetland inventory. So the National Wetland Inventory is the top, and our site is kind of, if you don't see where the site is, the National Wetland Inventory just shows Tickle Creek. It's a little bit north of our property on the National Wetland Inventory. And then on the local wet inventory, it's not been completed for this property, but it just kind of, Tickle Creek really just kind of nips the corner of the property. And so that shows kind of where the creek is, which is more of a riverine function rather than a wetland. And then our wetland expert looked at the site and did not find any wetlands on the site. So I think that condition should be removed based on the revised comments from the city engineer. Then we go to, let's see, where are we? Number 6. This, we're not sure where this I think it comes out of 1792, saying all landscaping shall be continually maintained. And we're not really, clear what this is referring to. What landscaping are we talking about? And continually maintained in perpetuity forever. And so it's not really clear. This is also very similar to condition 8, which gets a little more specific. So we're just requesting that this be removed or cleaned up or be more specific. If you look at 8, kind of a similar thing for 2 years. And I guess my initial note said if 1792 commission decides that doesn't apply, then this wouldn't apply. But I think it just needs to be more specific. What plants are we talking about in this condition? Number 12, kind of a similar thing, almost very similar nuance of language for maintaining unlandscaped revegetated areas for a period of 2 years. So we're not really clear what this is referring to. Number 13, there's an inconsistency. This is regarding if the applicant isn't able to plant the required street trees, they can pay a fee to kind of get out of planting them. And it says in one place, I underlined it, a 3-year bond, or 3-year maintenance, and a 2-year maintenance in another place. So I think the code says 2 years.
Are we going through all 79 of these?
Yeah,
pretty
that's
much.
what
Yeah, I don't know how else to
I mean,
do
this
it.
is kind of a...
Yeah, we're gonna be here all night, Teresa.
Yeah, so how else do you
Yeah.
want to do it? Because this
There's
is
major issues that have to.
Well, I mean, I think we would want to hear what the main issues are.
Snowing and freezing outside and the conditions are getting bad.
Yeah,
We're
this,
trying
it
to-
is snowing.
I mean, there's 79 of these and you're down to like 13 or something? 14 maybe?
That's, yeah, we could continue that.
I'll ask the planning commission.
But which,
advice.
well, the ones, I would say, is there a way to filter them to where there's ones that, you're saying this should be deleted because it's a taking, et cetera. Obviously, that's something that's a big deal. If one is just a conflict, it seems like you could just resolve that with staff and just identify it, and as we always do.
I mean, we had these big documents like this, and then Ron and you mainly asked for the conditions document like this.
Right.
But since we've been doing that last year, we've never had an applicant read condition by condition for
No.
like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this is kind of
This
a
will
little
wear
bit.
us down.
Yeah.
The ones that are in bold are the ones that we have contention with. All the ones that are shaded are not going over, which is about 40 of them.
Yeah, but there's plenty.
Still a
in
lot
bold.
of them.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
whatever.
a lot of problems with these conditions. There's a lot
There's
of
2 or
problems.
3 more hours of boldness, I can tell you
Yeah.
that. Having sat here for many years.
I don't know how else to do it, but unless, you send staff back to the drawing board. I mean, if we just go to, let's see, let me pick out a couple here. So condition number 27, they say you need to build a 6-foot sidewalk on local streets. Standard is 5 feet. So we just passed by that for building an additional feet unnecessarily, and it's not required. I don't know, I'm almost done, actually. The addition, number 32, it says, shall include an additional 10 feet of right-of-way. So we're already providing 10 feet. I think that could be read 10 feet in addition to what we're providing. So just knock out the words an additional 10 feet in additional, and it would be fine. So shall include 10 feet of right of way. That's what we're showing, not an additional 10 feet. So it's, yeah, it's a lot of things like that, you know, condition number 35, these aren't findings, these are just recommendations. Let's see, I think I'm almost done here. And number 78, the last one, this is the fee in lieu of, and that's, we don't have a problem with that, it just kind of depends on what the resolution is with the fee in lieu of being offered on the Chevrolet area or lot 19 that they're asking to take. I'll turn it over to Ray.
Yeah. Again, for the record, Ray Moore, All County Surveyors. I'll be brief. Tracy's, we worked this out, we typed it all out. So if we jump to 28, there are some issues that really need to have to be hashed out. And if this be continued, we'd be happy to continue with it, but I'll try to do it quick. Number 28 is a real specific condition regarding Newton Street.
So is this 28 of our conditions or
Correct.
28 of Tracy's list?
They should be the same.
It's the same.
I think they're the same.
Yeah, these are exactly your conditions.
So 28 required shifting the street. If we shift Newton Street north as suggested, my next client will probably lose his house. We'd have to tear the house down. There was a reason we shifted it like we did. All I'm asking is for a simple addition to that detailed condition if one were to say the city engineer may accept other reasonable design options. So it would give some flexibility if we add that one statement.
You're talking about at the
Yeah.
end of it there, we
Yeah.
show the house?
Right, we've got some ideas on how we can satisfy everybody's needs and leave the street like it is. So if you just added that last part to the condition, the city engineer may accept other reasonable design options. That would solve a lot of problems.
That'll make you happy even if he may not?
Well, it'll give us some flexibility, otherwise
Okay.
we have to move the road north and it's going to go through the neighbor's house, so. I would recommend adding that if you could. Item number 30, there's been a lot of discussion lately about thou shall extend the street all the way to the property line. And there's a couple conditions that deal with that. I'm proposing as an option, the developer may pay the city a fee in lieu of 125% of the cost to extend the street to the property line. And we can go into details why I think that's a bad idea. If you extend the street, you have to build retaining walls. The next guy is going to tear the retaining wall out. It's just a waste of money. If you end the street back 6 or 8 feet, pay the city a fee in lieu, 125% of the current cost to account for some future inflation, everybody should be happy.
So is that at the end of those two streets on the east?
Yeah, it comes up in a couple places. It comes up in condition 30 and later on here. 31, same thing. 31 is talking about Woodstock Street shall extend to the east line of the property. Well, we have a lot of grade like this. We're building a road like this. We're going to have a fill wall and a cut wall and just end the street back, pay a fee in lieu. 34, this one I don't get. The city engineer cited some Oregon Fire Code and Metro Code for a paved cul-de-sac radius of 48 feet. The city of Sandy's code is very specific, and I cited it in here. It's a 38-foot paved radius, not 48. We would like to stick with what the city code is unless the city wants to change the code. So that condition should be removed. Condition 38, that's a biggie. Let's just put an ADA ramp in the middle of Jacoby Road. The road's about 8% grade. I can't meet that condition of approval. I can't. It's an existing road. ADA landings, if you don't know, it's time you learn. 2% at the landing. City of Portland's even doing 1.5. Jacoby Road's at 8. I can't put an ADA ramp crossing that road. So that condition needs to be removed. Number 40. Staff on one hand said, well, we're going to have a bunch of these cars coming onto the new paved street, but then we want to plat a VNAR, which is you can't provide access to that street. So if we did do a VNR, we wouldn't have to worry about my concern of more cars than 2 on that half street. So again, that condition could be modified to state the VNR can be adjusted as needed to allow access to the new road with city engineering approval. So there needs to be some flexibility there. Number 48, public sanitary sewers. No, this is just a redundant. It's the exact same condition as number 45, remove 48. 49, oh, hey, when you're going to buy this house, let's give the neighbor a sewer lateral. Who's going to pay for that? Well, the city reimburses the developer for the cost of that lateral. I don't think he would care as long as he gets reimbursed. 52, public storm drain lines. This is the exact same condition as 45. Remove 52. Why have all these conditions when they say the same thing? 59, same as number 45. Please delete 59. 67, the applicant shall update the cut and fill. The applicant shall not cut or fill within the proposed tree protection area. And this has sort of been discussed. All I suggest is adding without approval of a certified arborist. And that's it, unless you have some questions of me.
Yeah, I mean, some of these conditions are bringing up and stuff, we'd have to go back to the engineer and consult with them.
Yeah,
I don't think we can do it at a meeting like
No.
this.
Well, and we were just given this right
Well,
here.
this
We haven't
list
had
is very
time.
exhaustive. I mean, staff hasn't had time to
Yeah,
go
we
through
haven't,
this at all.
exactly.
So do you think I'm not concerned about time. I mean, I'll be here till midnight if we need to. That's not it. My
Yeah.
concern is everybody's time. Is it worth continuing to where, you guys can meet and first of all, just hash out the stuff that's clerical.
Yeah.
That's it. And then they brought up some big things. And so then either if you want something on those tonight, we can, but we just have those big things, like when they talk about the taking, they talk about the authority of the planning commission, on the fee. Those seem to me like, big deals that.
Those would be something staff would typically talk to our attorney about.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They need to be staffed out.
We wouldn't talk about takings claims out of the public hearing.
Right, and that's my point, is that, is it kind of clear that we probably need to continue it? We'll go
Well,
along
I
tonight
just-
if we need to.
I was
That's
gonna
fine, but if
mention-
that's where we're kind of going to, that kind of helps a little bit, because that keeps us out of the nitty-gritty detail, because you're going to handle the nitty-gritty detail, and go from there.
That's what I wanted, and, we cannot do it, but I don't know if it was Tracy or Ray that did bring up the C word in your testimony just a bit ago. The C word, continuation. We
I don't
cannot,
consider
we
that.
cannot,
Hey, Dick, can I get clarification? from
yeah,
David?
Yeah.
I didn't think we
Hey,
can make it
David,
happen.
can staff request a continuation? I mean, we have tons of paperwork in front of us. We have
Yeah.
all these arborist
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah, no, I mean, the issue with a continuation is it's not something from the applicant, just plays into what the 120-day clock is. We certainly can continue the hearing. The issue is what we have in terms of time left on the 120-day.
Oh, okay. I didn't think we could initiate a continuance, but.
Do we have an issue with that?
No, you can initiate a continuance, it's just the clock keeps rolling if we do that.
Yeah, okay.
But if they do that,
From
does the clock
the
stop?
applicant, then there's a tolling, but no, you
Yeah,
certainly can. And
that's
I think, frankly, that's kind of consistent with what is being bandied about right now. I think that's probably a good idea.
So if the applicant asks for one, then that clock stops?
Yes, I knew there was something.
Yes, that's what I'm kind of looking at them. It seems to me like that would be a good idea, but I can't put words in their mouth.
What I'm looking for,
So there'd be a couple things with that. Just when we would actually meet to discuss this. The next meeting in 3 weeks is packed already.
right, and when's
And that would
the,
give us enough time with how much stuff we have currently to turn around something back.
and the 120 day was in April, wasn't it?
It was April 27th.
Okay.
So if
Yeah,
we go
but
to, the problem is if we go to the April planning commission meeting, then we're running right up against the clock.
Yeah.
And it needs to allow for an appeal as well. So, I mean, I think, you need to have something that would account for that. That's just a reality.
But if like I said, if the applicant asks for it, does that stop the clock, David?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Commissioner Carlton?
If the applicant asks for the continuance, does that cease the clock?
Yeah, any continuance from a request from an applicant then tolls the 120-day clock.
Okay.
So that's the distinction, correct?
So if we continue it, we've got to,
The The city would have to have a final decision, including, allowing for any appeal to council, by whatever that April date is.
April 27th, yeah. So about 2 months from now.
Which is just how many days after the meeting?
Well, yeah, if it was the April meeting, that'd be cutting it way too close. We'd have to have a
Right.
special meeting just to hear this.
We got a special meeting.
I do know that there was issues with meeting on spring break.
Yeah.
And that's why we kicked the next meeting to the 19th.
Right.
We already have 2 big agenda items for the 19th of March,
Mm-hmm.
which will probably take at least 3 to 4 hours to get through all of them.
Yeah.
And
This is just too
And
much
if we're
to
not-
digest.
yeah, if we're backed in the corner time-wise and not getting enough information, it's usually a motion to deny.
Yeah,
I mean, that's all we can do, right?
right.
Oh, well, we could approve it, but we're
I mean,
not
it's-
gonna approve it
Yeah.
if we're not feeling comfortable about it.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard thing for staff. I mean, some of the recommendations in here are from the Parks and Trails Advisory Board. So we're bringing those recommendations before you tonight. Now, whether the applicant's right or not, if we can actually enforce those, that'd be something I'd want to get back on the horn with the city attorney with outside of this meeting and talking about that. And then also probably let the Parks Board know that there's serious consideration for their recommendation not going forward.
Well, they,
I don't know.
but most of these questions, first of all, we're here because there's 3 variances to start with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't heard anybody against those 3 variances.
Correct.
Maybe throw that out.
Correct. yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, that's good. With the discussion is the conditions of approval.
Conditions, right.
Okay? I just want to make sure we may hone it down. I don't know if the applicant is interested in doing a continuance or not. That would be the easiest solution because that would allow the clock not to be as big an issue. If not, we'll figure it out. We have to allow time for them to get the work done, too. It isn't just us
Right.
meeting.
Right.
Right. And
mean,
it's
they
not-
I guess, would the applicant be willing to grant a 30-day extension? I mean, they aren't under any obligation to do that, but I mean, we can certainly ask.
okay. You guys,
I mean,
you
getting it
guys
done
need
right
wanna
is better.
talk about it.
important
You
than
guys
getting
need
it
a
done.
huddle?
Go huddle.
Yeah, go ahead.
The applicant wants to take a break. Caucus.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is it's just too much information, especially since.
Right.
When
Is
did,
this not- Yeah,
I think we have to wait
we
for
have
that
to
next
delay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, we
sorry.
can't.
when did
Sorry.
you
sorry.
get this? Or did this tonight?
Right now.
Tonight.
Okay.
Yeah,
You know, that's
so-
probably one thing in our process we need to square up. I mean, I'm glad. I think we need to do this, what you did. But the idea of them responding here and they expect us to react to them, it just puts you up a tree, right?
First time.
So, I don't know, maybe just, you could figure that into the timeline that,
Yeah.
this goes to them in enough time and then they have to respond back.
Yeah,
before they-
I would appreciate when they return, you guys have a discussion with them.
Okay.
Does this happen continually?
Yeah, we're blindsided.
Right.
Yeah.
And this happens a lot?
But can you,
Yeah,
can
it
you
can.
change your process to where you will not schedule a planning commission until you kind of go through this?
We'd have to ask David once they return, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking how much our process can make things easier, so we're not, I don't want us to be part of the problem, I want us to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just, since they're back in the room, I'll be very honest. I talked to Ray last Wednesday, and it sounded like the trail and the dedication, everything was a go from our discussion with Ray.
Well, I'd like
And
to
so-
correct that understanding. I said if there was some reimbursement, I'll pass it on to the developer and I'll let them make the decision.
So anyways, it's kind of getting blindsided with them at the meeting. We have no, from my previous discussion, this is totally different now, so, which is fine. It's just we need more time to
So
go through it.
I'd like to talk now as the applicant, I guess, staff is, technically, we didn't get the staff report within 7 days prior. I don't wanna go into all this petty stuff, so where are we going from here? We need, if we're continuing the hearing, it needs to be to a date certain. And
Mhm.
so I guess our position will depend on what we figure out as the date certain. So
Oh.
if we can talk about that, in terms of continuing or, granting an extension of 120 days. So I'd like to talk about, first of all, when would this be continued to, before we kind of talk about what are we requesting a continuance, or
Okay.
do we need to extend the 120-day processing clock?
Okay, well, we know
Sounds
it,
like it's a problem of staffs to have it in April, so that's kind of pushing us back when to when.
well, is
I mean,
April out?
Can we do it in
Have it
April?
in April.
I mean, that's kind of a hard question to answer, because I think the date certain would depend on if they're gonna
Yeah.
grant an extension or not.
Yeah,
Well,
Tracy, the
but-
problem
As soon
is,
as we can have it. I
Yeah,
guess.
if he's asking for continuation, that's gonna stop the clock. The date's certain, if we looked at April, we know March is out of the question.
We're meeting
But you said we could do it in April.
19.
Okay, so let's.
19th, no, wait a second, don't. Oh, the 19th of March, is that what you pointed to?
The 22nd is the plan-on date, but
Yeah, it's
I
too
know.
late.
Having gone through with Jerry, meeting twice a month for about a year or so, I'm pretty flexible.
Right, but the thing is with that is we can't set a date certain other than the regular monthly meeting because we have too many people here to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea if we can get a quorum unless
Yeah.
all
Right.
four of you can commit to it right now.
Right,
Then we would know.
yeah. And that would be April 22nd.
I mean, I'm not going anywhere in April. I retired. I'm
Yep.
up late.
I've got it on my-
and you can still.
So we
I've
could
got
have
it
the
on my
meeting.
calendar.
Yeah, we could have the meeting like earlier in April, like probably a non-Monday night.
Well, what's wrong with doing it on the 22nd?
Because if they appeal our decision, then we don't have enough time.
No,
to
no,
bring it.
if they have requested it.
Oh, I gotcha.
Then it's gonna stop the clock. So you gain that much time.
It would be my preference, to not
Hold on, yeah.
22nd,
Yeah.
but.
Hold on,
The attorney's
David's
speaking.
trying to talk.
What would be your preference?
Any other time in April.
Okay, the 21st.
Hold on a second, David's gonna say something here.
No, it's okay. I was kind of going, go ahead.
I think it's your turn. I think you have the floor now.
Okay, all I was going to say is it seems pretty clear that the applicant wants to have a sense of what date it would be before they're going to be willing to grant the extension.
Correct.
If they're going to grant it at all, and that's what I heard from Tracy. So I think getting that date first is probably the critical thing, and it sounds like that's what's happening now.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's a lot of date.
Yeah, there's a lot of,
Well, the 22nd would be the next one after that, 22nd of April.
yeah, but Tracy doesn't like that one. so-
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going on vacation the next day, so if there's a way to do it earlier in April,
We
that'd
can go
be
on
my
vacation with your mind clear.
preference. And I can't do it, we could do it on the 15th, we all want to be on tax day unless we're.
We can't do it on the
taxes.
15th, council has to.
Yeah,
agree.
council.
How about 16?
16th, no. Any other time that week, though.
I think it's up to you guys.
It would
I
be-
mean, I think we should do it earlier than that. if we're gonna
Yeah,
do
me
it.
too, because we're gonna turn around
Yeah,
and
that
have a
would be
planning
fine.
commission meeting 2 days
How about
later
the
or
9th?
something.
The 8th would be open.
The 8th would be open.
8th is open, that's not council.
Yeah, that sounds good too. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, let me make sure with the council agenda, they have a lot of meetings coming up. Hold on one second here. They have like so many special meetings right now.
Oh, we'll just bump them out.
You can tell them that.
Get a bunch of meetings out of it.
April 8th.
8, Monday.
Looks open, the 9th.
April 8th.
Different, yeah.
April 8th is open.
The 8th is okay.
And this would be a special meeting for this issue only?
Correct. I think that'd be better anyways, because on the 22nd, we have a pretty, I think it's gonna be a pretty long meeting.
Okay. 8th work for you, Tracy?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And, you know, we're willing to hold the clock until that time.
Okay,
And so those days between now and can just be added on to the end of the clock.
right.
So it'd be 100, so you would just have those as extension days?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Right.
that's the way it would work, David, right?
That's correct,
Yeah. Okay,
So,
so you're making an official request?
Yeah, we're making a request. I mean, we're requesting to hold the clock to that April 8th date.
And continue the meeting till
Continue
then?
the meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
oh, let's go ahead.
You
I have
did have-
something to say, so I just want to make sure we
Well,
don't
and you had a
stop.
question
Close.
about, what's that?
I need to close the public hearing. Well, no,
Yeah,
we're
but
gonna
I know you
continue.
guys had a question that I think they might need to answer, and that is, are we gonna get another
Yes,
Okay.
Oh,
getting
yes.
something like this at this meeting, it's impossible to say yes to anything, because we don't have any time to digest it,
Part of
so.
the problem that we have is we didn't get the condition of approval 7 days ahead of time, which is required, so we kind of, we're throwing this
Yeah,
all together.
I mean, yeah,
Okay.
I mean, everybody agrees, I think that's the case, and I think the staff just needs to work with applicants to
Yeah.
try and make that happen, so. Part of it is, it all kind of depends what's in here, you know, if you got some big stuff in here, then it's a problem. Sometimes we get this and it's not big stuff you can't deal with.
Yeah, the little stuff.
Okay, what we need is a motion to continue it to April 8th.
You want to keep the variances going, or do you want to deal with the variances tonight?
That's another.
I mean, if we had a quick resolution to them, if you want to approve them, it would make our.
I mean,
staff
I don't see any
much
problem
simpler.
with the,
I didn't either. Did you have
with
it?
the three,
No, the things that you had suggested.
The things that Emily
Yeah.
had.
yeah, I mean,
Yes.
the
No,
tiered
I'm
lots
fine.
are required by the topography. The front door, you know, facing Jacoby would make those look silly compared to the rest of the subdivision. And then the block length is, again, one of those things you run into, you know? And, so I'm okay with us approving the variances. That would get us one further down the road and get them one way further down the road.
Hollis wants to make the motion.
Oh, goody!
Can I make the motion then, make a motion that we approve the variances as recommended by staff?
I think I just want to add, I think on one of the variances for the block length, it was tied a little bit also to the trail connector,
Oh.
because that would provide an additional pedestrian connectivity option in the future. So I'm just throwing that out there.
So maybe we should do the other two then.
What was
I would suggest that, I mean, there's enough issues with the trail that are gonna have to be kind of worked through. My suggestion, and there's no, you know, by quote unquote approving the variances tonight, you haven't really still approved anything because you won't really have an approval until you have the, you know, the final order done. That's a ways off. I think if you want to give the applicant sort of the courtesy, or everybody for that matter, just sort of your take on the variances, that's great. But I don't, you know, if there is an issue that's connected to the trail, and that is, you know, such a big part of, I think, what remains to be discussed, I'd be a little hesitant to go, you know, to approve that now.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
But, so what he's basically, we send a signal to you guys, what our
I think to me, maybe the way to think about it, maybe more, is that does anybody have, on the commission, have concerns with the variances? Because if there are, then that's probably something that we'd also want to, you know, be addressing during this, in the interim.
Well, nobody has mentioned anything other than the issue that,
But I'm not clear at this point.
so we would not be making a motion to approve.
We're not gonna make a motion, but I guess, yeah.
Motion dies
Okay.
for lack of second.
So we need to, how do we do the continuance?
have something,
Is it
Kelly?
done? Do we need a motion?
We'd have a motion to continue, but Kelly, you had kind of a look that you had something you wanted to say, but.
Oh, Emily asked, since you guys have been hearing this for almost 3 hours now, and this is kind of at David's discretion, I've seen it done both ways in municipalities I worked in, but if you guys are gonna be open, if like Ron is back, or if we have another person at that point, which I hope we do, we're gonna start interviewing here pretty soon. If you would be comfortable with them hearing it, just because they hadn't heard the 3 hours of testimony so far? Or
They would need to, they,
heard it.
if they read the tape, they could participate. That's what
Yeah.
I did when
Yeah.
I joined.
I did
It's
not.
up to them.
Yeah.
What was I missed that last comment. I heard the question, but I missed the comment.
So it's just, I just want to make sure planning commission was comfortable with either Ron or whoever else might be on the commission at that point when we continue it to also be party to the decision.
Participate in it.
Yes.
Yeah. As long as Ron can, you know, review the information, you know, that he's able to participate. And I guess I would just point out, maybe we could does the applicant have any concern about that? I mean, that's something that they're going to have a problem with.
I'm standing at the podium. I was just gonna say, on the concept, we don't have a problem with that. I guess if there is a new commissioner, I don't know who that person will be and what their connections are to different things, so we still would reserve the right at the hearing, continued hearing, to contest the, individual members or something like that, as you read through the pro forma at the beginning, so just want to make sure.
As a basic matter, Tracy, if it were Ron and he was able to say, yes, I've listened to the audio, or I went through all the materials, I have an understanding of what was discussed and the concerns, and under those sort of general guidelines?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's fine.
Yeah, because we may need them for a quorum.
Yeah, no, understood. Yeah, we want to make sure.
Yeah.
So I guess if there isn't a quorum, then staff will be in contact with us. We can figure out another date, and, we don't have a problem kind of continuing. We don't want it to be continued forever, obviously.
Right.
Well, as far as we know, we have a quorum, right?
Yeah, we know.
We can all make the 8th?
We know our quorum issue pretty well ahead, so it looks like we got one anyway. Okay, so then the motion would be to continue.
I move we continue the public hearing to April 8th, 2019. At the request of the applicant. Make sure it's clear, I guess.
Okay, the motion has been made at the request of the applicant to continue the hearing to April 8, 2019, 7 o'clock, this location. All in favor? Can we just do a voice vote on that?
Voice vote's fine, yep.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll see you in 2.5 months.
Thanks, guys.
Again, we'll recalculate, but I think that makes the new 120-day deadline June 8th.
Yeah, it'll move it up almost a couple months.
It's 42 days, I think.
Okay, do you have anything else for us?
I do, but I'll just talk about it in March, since everybody wants to get out of here and get through the weather, so.
Is it looking nasty out there?
I think it's getting worse, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Have fun.
Nobody has to go very far.
I have to.
She has a
Tracy?
foot at her
I
house.
have
Kelly?
to go at 1,800 feet.
Kelly?
Yeah.
Kelly, you might make a note to tech support that this monitor wasn't displaying.
2 hours.
She's got that, okay. I fooled with it, but I couldn't see anything. It just said no signal, it's on.
We have not closed the hearing, or the meeting. We haven't adjourned.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion we adjourn.
Oh, he already got you.
You have to second it.
Hey, you ought to be able to do that.
Well, I'll second.
I mean, you gotta do something tonight.
Okay, it's been moved and
I'll second
seconded
that
to
motion.
adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed on that one? I guess you can't oppose an adjournment. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Have a good night.
Yeah, you bet. We'll be talking to you.
Try to
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Before,
I must say, I love this.
didn't do it for this one.
I don't care where it is or why it is.
Did you turn off your
Yeah.